Our protagonist Hans is tasked with locating the hidden den of the dragon before two powerful aristocratic houses ignite a war to claim it. So despite his frail condition, he forces himself to trek across the Compton Mountains day after day, pretending to survey the territory while secretly searching for the dragon's hidden refuge. Because if his attendants discover his real goal, gossip would spread in an instant. After long hours of wandering, exhaustion overwhelms Hans and he considers heading back. Then, distracted by his thoughts, he loses his footing and plunges from the edge of a cliff. Agony bursts through his chest as bones snap with a sickening crack. Dangling midway down the cliff, bleeding and isolated, he is certain death is. At that moment he notices it, a concealed opening carved into the cliff face. He drags himself through the entrance and discovers a vast chamber where a radiant golden circle glows upon the ground. The instant he crosses the threshold, his injuries knit together and his shattered ribs mend completely. Further within the cavern, Hans encounters a magnificent golden dragon, and as his hand makes contact, a surge of brilliant light floods into his body, granting him a dragon's heart along with extraordinary strength. Long before this discovery, inside a military encampment set within the Compton mountain range, messages arrive stating patrols have been hindered by relentless rain. Yet strange lights were spotted to the northeast, and with poor visibility, the troops suspect they belong to McCarthy's forces. Commanding the camp is Count Adrian von Callista. Upon hearing the update, the Count rises personally to confirm the details. At the same time, the soldiers grumble about the harsh conditions they must endure. They suffer in foreign territory over the mere possibility of a dragon, all because the Count seeks approval from the Dukes of Townsend. Whispers claim the Count is incompetent, though the troops take comfort in believing he can still lead in combat. They have no idea they are mistaken, for the man beneath the helmet is not Callista. The armored figure is actually Hans, our main character. He has served the Callista household since childhood. In the beginning, he merely assisted with school. Soon after, he was compelled to train in swordsmanship and other martial skills. When Adrian's father passed away, Hans had to shoulder administrative duties across the territory. In time, Hans became Adrian's substitute in public matters, while the real noble squandered his days drinking and chasing women. Now Hans stands on the battlefield in Adrian's place. He accepted the burdens of impersonation, yet never expected to face actual war. Hans and the troops finally arrive at the spot where the mysterious lights were reported. With sight obscured by weather, a soldier proposes retreating to camp. Hans, however, drifts into thoughts about common folk and whether any afterlife awaits them. Just as they decide to withdraw, a soldier is suddenly struck down. They quickly realize they have fallen into a trap. Amid the chaos, a spear pierces Hans from behind. He collapses, questioning if this is truly his end. He cannot accept that he will die merely as another man's replacement. As darkness overtakes him, he wonders about the chance of another life, a world where he might finally exist as himself, rather than a shadow. With that final thought, Hans closes his eyes and slips away. Abruptly, he opens them once more. He sees the maid Madeline kneeling in tears before him. He is puzzled by her presence and notices how young she appears. Hans is stunned when she pleads and addresses him as her lord. At that moment, he realizes he is. Gripping a whip tightly in his hand, surveying the surroundings, he finds himself inside an opulent and lavish chamber. Gazing into a mirror, he notices the face of Count Callista staring back at him. He drops the whip at once and clutches his face, trying to confirm the reflection is real. With remorse in his eyes, he hurries toward Madeline, but she instinctively shields herself, bracing for a blow. Hans withdraws and instead asks her what year it currently is. Madeline answers that it is the year 853. Revelation shakes him as he understands the truth. He has somehow taken over Count Callista's body. Moreover, time itself appears to have reversed by 15 years. Overwhelmed, Hans sinks onto the bed, unsure whether he is dreaming or awake. He remains in a grand room, adorned with glittering luxuries. The Count's physique feels fragile and pampered, unused to any physical labor. To sort out his thoughts, Hans orders Madeline to step outside. As she departs quietly, marks from a cane are visible on the backs of her legs, evidence of Adrian's repeated cruelty. Hans collapses onto the mattress, admitting Adrian may be the most disgraceful lord imaginable. Adrian is infamous for punishing servants over trivial matters and treating them as playthings. As he matured, Adrian sank deeper into indulgence and excess. Throughout it all, Hans was left to resolve the disasters he caused. A sudden memory flashes through Hans's mind, prompting him to dash out of the chamber. He pushes open a door expecting familiarity, but is met with something entirely different. The room that once belonged to him has been converted into storage. Though shocked, he is certain he has not mistaken the location. After living there for over 2 decades, he cannot fathom the change as he hears a servant calling out to him. The servant Claude questions why the Lord is wandering within the servants' quarters. Claude recognizes Hans, having grown up alongside him and Madeline. They look exactly as he remembers. Hans turns to Claude and asks where the servant named Hans is. The inquiry confuses Claude, who insists he has never known anyone by that name. Hans attempts to describe himself, yet Claude remains utterly perplexed. A painful truth dawns on him. By reincarnating as Adrian, his former self no longer exists. Word spreads among the staff about the Lord's strange conduct. Some notice he now rises at dawn instead of midday. Two maids gossip about Hans until he suddenly appears behind them, startling them badly. He offers an apology for frightening them and requests that they summon the nanny. A full week has passed since Hans took over Adrian's body. Hans understands he must embrace his identity as Adrian and assume the responsibilities tied to that life. Soon the nanny arrives, concerned about his sleep habits. Hans admits he barely rests, feeling as though he never truly closes his eyes. He asks if he would like breakfast prepared, but he declines. Instead, he says he intends to visit his mother. Annie reacts with visible astonishment, yet she quickly agrees that visiting his mother is a thoughtful idea. Hans heads toward his mother's private quarters, and upon reaching the entrance, both his sister Regina and his mother Owen stare at him in utter surprise. Regina hesitantly asks why he has come so early, while Owen scolds her for speaking that way. Yet Regina cannot be blamed since Adrian has never shown concern for his family. Owen quickly invites her son inside, telling him she is truly glad to see him. It has been 3 years since the former count passed away, and the shock left Owen confined to her bed for a long time. Now only Adrian, Owen, and Regina remain as the surviving members of House Calista. Though their lands lie far from the center of the Rosenbaum Empire, the Calistas were once prosperous. After the old count's death, their prestige collapsed and poverty followed. They even rented out their soldiers just to survive. In the future, Hans remembers, Owen dies and Regina inherits an estate drowning in debt. Hans gently takes his mother's hand and promises he will visit her more frequently. Owen softly replies that he should not trouble himself too much over visiting. She understands that running the estate already weighs heavily on him. Once he leaves her room, Hans resolves to use every effort to restore proper order to the estate. At that moment, the butler Allman informs him that Mr. Flynn has arrived to see him. Hans recalls that during this period, Allman served as Adrian's butler, a man known for fierce loyalty and for defending the servants' interests. Allman had even stepped in physically whenever Adrian tried to harm the staff. Despite being treated harshly, he never wavered in his dedication. Around this time, Allman had resigned and was replaced by Sage, a disastrous butler whose incompetence worsened the family's financial ruin. Knowing this is when Allman originally left, Hans begins considering how to prevent that outcome. Meanwhile, he arranges to meet Flynn, the territory's administrator. Flynn is infamous for abusing the servants, striking them as though they were his personal property. Hans listens to Flynn, and just as he anticipated, Flynn announces he has selected a replacement for Allman and suggests dismissing him immediately. Hans is stunned as he hears Flynn outline this proposal. Exactly as before, Flynn recommends a man named Sade, praising him as capable and like a brother. Before he can continue, Hans cuts him off sharply. Clutching his head in frustration, Hans demands to know if Flynn truly intends to fire Allman. Noticing Hans's confusion, Flynn pretends the misunderstanding is his own fault. He slips a hand into his inner pocket and pulls something out. Grasping Hans's hand, he places 10 gold coins into his palm. The gesture leaves Hans horrified and sickened, and claims he wishes to spare the young lord from dirty matters, explaining he will remove Allman by accusing him of embezzlement. As usual, Flynn says the documents are already prepared. Hans remains silent, staring at the heavy gold in his hand. Struggling household typically survives on 10 silver coins per month. 10 gold coins equal nearly 20 months of expenses for an average person, since 1 gold equals 20 silver. The territory's administrator, Flynn has only modest official earnings and no other legitimate income. Hans quickly realizes the bribe must have been stolen from the people. He feels deep disappointment knowing Adrian accepted such corrupt money while allowing men like Flynn to control the estate. It becomes clear that Allman was forced out rather than resigning. Though many suspected false accusations, none spoke up, and Hans had been too young then to understand. The full truth leaves Hans utterly disillusioned. In a steady voice, Hans summons Oswald, his night guard. To everyone's surprise, he orders Oswald to arrest Flynn immediately. Hans declares that Flynn attempted corruption and falsely accused a servant, commanding Oswald to imprison him in the dungeon. Oswald obeys at once while Flynn stands stunned. Flynn desperately calls out to Hans, but Hans ignores him as Oswald drags him away. Hans drops the 10 gold coins onto the table, questioning why fate placed him in Adrian's body. Though he lacks many answers, he knows Adrian hurt countless people. He refuses to repeat those mistakes. In the Grand Hall, Oswald hauls Flynn toward the dungeon, insults Flynn as scum, and orders him to walk properly, caring little about the reason for his arrest. Flynn can hardly believe he is being thrown into a cell. In a household weakened by poor leadership, Oswald remains the sole loyal knight. Flynn always thought Adrian a fool, easy to bend to his will. Now imprisoned, Flynn wonders if Adrian is finally growing pride, unaware that a different soul now controls that body. Still, Flynn assumes Hans will struggle, believing the world is unforgiving. Oswald shoves Flynn into the dungeon cell without respect for his former status. When Flynn protests the rough treatment, Oswald orders him silent until the Lord decides his fate. Oswald is the son of a knight who served the previous count, and while others departed, he remained out of loyalty. Inside the cell, Flynn convinces himself he can still charm the Lord. He plans to manipulate events and have Oswald dismissed, unable to tolerate a mere knight acting superior. In his mind, Adrian is only a lazy 15-year-old with poor judgment. Flynn has long steered him into raising taxes, and Adrian always complies. He assumes this is just a passing mood, and that flattery will soon restore his influence. Flynn rehearses the speech he will deliver when the Lord visits. He even practices laughing and kneeling if necessary, still muttering when Hans arrives. From the way Hans carries himself, Flynn begins doubting whether this is the same boy he once controlled. He quickly drops to his knees, begging for forgiveness. With icy calm, Hans states there is no need to plead because from now on, every crime in the territory will be settled through formal trials. The word trial fills Flynn with dread. Hans turns to leave as Flynn cries out desperately. He attempts his usual manipulation, claiming loyalty and service. Hans pays no attention and walks away without a glance. Flynn rose from common birth to become a powerful administrator, once highly respected. Now he stands in court facing charges of bribery, embezzlement, and betrayal of trust, risking confiscation of property and imprisonment. The trial shocks the territory's citizens and warns other corrupt officials. Even the household servants are astonished, as formal trials have been rare for years. Hans gathers all the servants together. They tremble, fearing punishment. Ullman informs Hans that everyone has assembled. With sincerity, Hans asks how he has behaved as their lord, believing those closest to him know best. The question leaves the servants bewildered. They simply hope they will not be struck. After a long silence, Hans speaks again. What he says next stuns everyone present. Hans bows deeply and apologizes for the pain he caused through his reckless temper. Servants murmur in confusion, as Hans admits that one apology cannot erase past cruelty. Still, he wishes to make amends and confesses he has been an unreliable leader. However, he promises that from this day onward, he will transform Callista into a better place for all of them. To begin, he must first care properly for those within his castle. Hans vows to correct every wrongdoing, acknowledging initial chaos, but asking for their trust and support. The servants remain stunned and unable to comprehend the change. Later, Claude and Madeline discuss the transformation. Madeline recalls being beaten only days ago and questions how someone could change so quickly. She wonders whether such a drastic shift is even possible. In his chamber, Hans thanks Ullman for his service and tells him he may leave if he wishes. Yet Ullman remains and he bows deeply in gratitude, leaving Hans startled. Ullman admits he knows the Lord defended him against Flynn's false charges. Hans tells him to stand, saying he merely did what was just after so many years together. Hans clasps Ullman's hand firmly and instructs him to report immediately if anyone ever attempts to frame him again. Hearing these words, Ullman concludes the Lord has truly transformed. He has served the Callista household for more than a decade. The Lord's face looks the same. Ullman feels as if he is standing before an entirely different man. Moved by this resolve, Ullman swears loyalty to Hans and promises to stand by him. The evening approaches. Hans stands quietly beside the window of his chamber. He reflects on everything that has happened to him. It becomes clear to him that this is more than a simple rebirth. He has inherited the rank of Count Callista and authority over the entire territory that comes with it. On top of that, he retains memories from 15 years into the future. Fortunately, he already understands estate management from his former life, and he intends to use that experience wisely. As his first act of reform, Hans resolves to safeguard the people closest to him. That means his family, as well as every servant under his roof. He dreams of a land where people are not chained by class or title. Yet he knows real change requires strengthening the territory first. He searches his memory for any future knowledge that might aid this goal. Suddenly, the story of the dragon's lair comes back to him. Realizing its importance, his eyes brighten with excitement. The hidden dragon lair is exactly what he needs to secure. With this realization, Hans wastes no time and takes action. He organizes the servants to begin searching for the rumored lair. Days pass with no discoveries. Seeing his fatigue, Oswald urges him to rest. Hans refuses to stop, accepting only a water pouch from Oswald. He drinks deeply and apologizes for pushing everyone so hard, claiming they are merely surveying the land while secretly hunting the dragon's lair. Dragons were revered as the most powerful and intelligent divine beings, nearly godlike in status, though they vanished long ago. Never a dragon's hideout is uncovered. It causes uproar because immense treasure is often found with. Hans remembers clearly that one such lair will emerge in these mountains. The Rosenbaum Empire is ruled by a young puppet emperor, while real power lies with the Townsend and McCarthy families. These two houses maintain the empire's fragile balance. Compton Mountains sit between their borders, and when the lair was discovered there, conflict erupted. Callista lands lie nearby, forcing them to side with Townsend. Now back in time, Hans has 15 years to find the lair first. Leaving the servants behind, he ventures deeper into the forest, recalling tales of dragons hoarding vast riches. Such wealth could purchase a kingdom, and Hans believes securing it would stabilize his domain. Precise location was never known, only that an herbalist stumbled upon it by chance in an oak forest. Confident he will recognize it once seen, Hans presses onward. After hours of searching, exhaustion sets in and he finds nothing, not even a clue pointing toward the lair. Questions whether the herbalist's tale was ever true. With the sun sinking low, he prepares to head back. Adrian's frail body reminds him of its weakness through deep fatigue. Hans decides he must train and strengthen this body soon. Servants call out for him, and he feels guilty for worrying them. He considers asking for help, but rejects the idea, knowing the lair's existence could ignite war if revealed. Lost in thought, he suddenly slips down a cliff. He crashes against the ground, injured. Somehow he survives the fall, hanging midway down the cliff. His vision blurs before his eyes. With broken ribs, he struggles upward despite the pain. As he regains footing, he spots a strange opening carved into the mountain. Instantly, he knows he has found the dragon's lair. Hidden halfway along a cliff face, the entrance seems absurdly placed, likely once guarded by a dragon's protector. Harsh terrain kept it concealed for centuries, though now he stands before it. Still, he worries about climbing back to safety later. Doubts Oswald could ever locate him here. As grim thoughts of death cross his mind, he steps into a grand hall, where a golden magic circle gleams at the center. He moves into the circle without hesitation. Instantly his wounds vanish, and his body is restored. Stunned because the lair was believed empty, he wonders whether the space itself holds healing enchantments. Realizing its value, he sees the healing magic alone as priceless. Tempted by grand possibilities, he forces himself to stay focused. Determined, he begins exploring the lair in detail. Someone reborn in another's body, this discovery could become his greatest advantage. Soon he finds 4 passageways branching from the central chamber, the layout resembling an anthill. Continuing onward, he discovers what appears to be a library. Knowing dragons could assume human form, he assumes this one embraced human comforts, as the lair includes living quarters and studies. No mountains of gold appear. Hans senses the place holds immense potential. The healing chamber impresses him most, and he names it the Healing Hall. Healing magic is nearly forgotten in this era, making the find extraordinary. Entering the final unexplored room, Hans suddenly stops, frozen in shock and fear. Before him lies a golden dragon. Struggles to accept what he sees. Dragons supposedly vanished a century ago, so he assumes the creature must be a corpse. Yet the body shines too brilliantly to seem lifeless. Drawn by curiosity, Hans reaches out and touches it. Brilliant light erupts from the dragon and fills the chamber. Radiance forces him to stagger back. The glow then flows into his body while a voice echoes within his mind. Confused, he tries to comprehend the situation. He suddenly stands before a man clad in regal robes. Sensing an inhuman aura, Hans nervously asks who he is. The figure introduces himself as Seyfried, last leader of the Gold Clan and final dragon of the continent. Hans realizes with shock that he faces a dragon. He questions whether this dragon rules the lair, prompting an explanation. Seyfried explains the body is merely an empty shell, while the voice is the magic he left behind. Still confused, Hans listens as Seyfried elaborates. Dragons once ruled the land, but destroyed themselves through rivalry. Seyfried became the last of his kind, and though dragons live alone, he cannot accept their magic fading forever. Therefore, he chose to pass his legacy to the one destined to discover his lair. He reveals he died in year 354, leaving a spell lasting 5 centuries, after which dragon magic would vanish if no successor appeared. He expresses gratitude that Hans has arrived as that successor. Seyfried hopes dragon magic will endure for generations. Hans protests he knows nothing of magic and notes how few mages remain. Seyfried laughs at his concern. Hans wonders what amuses him. The dragon reminds him he was chosen, touching Hans's right chest as he speaks. Hans suddenly returns to awareness inside the lair, questions whether the encounter was real or illusion. Looking around, he sees the dragon's body has completely disintegrated. He realizes he has inherited the dragon's heart. On the right side of his chest, he feels another presence beside his human heart, like a smoky yet powerful source of magic. Through the newly formed dragon heart, Seyfried's memories flood into Hans, overwhelming him with knowledge he can barely comprehend. Even so, one truth stands out clearly to him. He can now wield dragon tongue magic. like human mages, who must chant lengthy spells before releasing them. Dragon speech requires only a single command word to activate. Because this power draws strength from a dragon heart, Hans trusts the heart Seyfried left him will sustain it. Using this newfound dragon tongue ability, Hans speaks the word fly and soars back up to the mountaintop. Yet the effort drains nearly all his mana. Dragon heart has not fully synchronized with him, limiting his magical reserves. Still, he remains calm, believing the heart will mature alongside him and grant him near-divine power in time. At last he rejoins his anxious servants who feared the worst. They rush toward him, checking him over in panic. Soon after, the group prepares to head back to the estate. Hans smiles, realizing he returned with far more than he sought. He went searching for a lair and came back as a dragon's heir. He recalls Seyfried's spell lasting 5 centuries and calculates the years since the dragon's death. Shockingly, had he arrived a year later, the legacy would have vanished forever. In his former life, the lair was only discovered 15 years later, which explains why magic remained so diminished. Most mages never surpass the 1st or 2nd circle, and reaching the 5th marks one as an archmage. Dragons, however, are born at the 9th circle, a realm humans cannot touch. Now that he carries a dragon's power, the 9th circle no longer feels impossible. Upon returning to the estate, his sister greets him anxiously, scolding him for disappearing and noting his torn clothes, fearing he encountered bandits. Hans reassures her he is unharmed, admitting he was injured but has since recovered. Oswald kneels in guilt for failing to protect him, and even his sister blames the loyal knight. Hans calms everyone, insisting no one is at fault. Back in his chamber, he exhales deeply. He recognizes that Oswald and Ullman remain because of unwavering loyalty. Their presence reassures him, knowing they will stand by him no matter what. He sends for Ullman at once. Butler arrives promptly, and Hans apologizes for summoning him so late. He inquires about the servant roster and salary records he requested earlier. Ullman confirms everything is prepared, though he questions reviewing them at such an hour. Gently reminds Hans of the lateness of the night, and mentions hearing about his earlier accident. Yet Hans insists he feels fine. Hans orders the documents brought regardless, remaining firm despite Ullman's concern. The welfare of his servants matters too much to delay action. Realizing he cannot dissuade him, Ullman complies. Shortly after, Hans pulls several gold coins from his pocket. He asks Ullman whether he understands the meaning of grace. Meanwhile, Claude visits a market vendor named Lohan to place an order. He hands her the list, leaving her astonished. When he asks if the order is manageable, Lohan assures him she can fulfill it easily. Surprise stems from joy rather than difficulty. Hans's new policies have transformed the territory. Taxes are reduced, estate orders increase, and hope has returned to the people. Lohan hands Claude a receipt and promises evening delivery. Before he leaves, she unexpectedly gives him 2 apples. She says it is her way of thanking him for serving such a changed lord, believing the servants influenced his transformation. Claude hurries back toward the estate. On the way, he meets Madeline gathering herbs. Beaming, he proudly holds up the apples. He offers one to Madeline, who asks in surprise where it came from. He explains Lohan gifted them, astonishing her. The notoriously stingy woman has softened, which shocks everyone. Claude notes that Flynn's punishment was unexpected, along with the removal of other corrupt officials. Hans personally reviewed the ledgers to root out corruption. Illegally collected taxes were refunded to citizens and servants alike. Servants now enjoy higher wages, rest periods, and new uniforms, while the castle doors are open to the public. With more freedom, servants can relax outside as Claude and Madeline do, and he notices her speaking kindly of the Lord. He reminds her that the same Lord once mistreated them. Doubting people can change so quickly. Madeline admits that whenever she sees Hans now, she feels she judged him too harshly. Given recent events, she believes he deserves another chance. Claude teases her, asking if his looks sway her opinion, which she firmly denies. Soon they head back toward the castle. They remark that Hans has become elusive, claiming inspections while rarely seen. Unbeknownst to them, he has been visiting the dragon's lair. Within the lair, Hans practices magic diligently. He can now conjure spells such as fireballs, and he has mastered protective shields as well. Nearly a month has passed since inheriting the dragon's power, and he trains relentlessly. His progress is evident, and he knows greater strength will follow. Still, traveling by horse each time to practice feels inconvenient. Since the lair is magically reinforced and indestructible, it serves as ideal training grounds. Easier access would benefit him greatly. He considers teleportation magic known as the Warp Gate. This advanced 7th circle spell allows safe relocation to fixed coordinates, but Hans remains only at the 2nd or 3rd circle. Even so, surpassing the Empire's Grand Mage at level 5 seems achievable. To improve, he focuses on mastering Blink, a 3rd circle short-range teleport, though repeated attempts end in failure. Refusing to give up, he tries once more. This time the spell succeeds. He shifts slightly forward from his original spot. As he celebrates the small victory, the surroundings suddenly turn white. A strange pulse radiates from his dragon heart. Looking up, he sees Seyfried, who praises his dedication. Dragon announces Hans has passed the beginner stage and rewards him. Seyfried unlocks another hidden section of the lair, promising greater benefits as Hans grows stronger. Hans asks why the treasures were concealed. Seyfried explains it was to prevent greedy individuals from claiming them. He urges Hans to continue advancing so dragon magic may endure. Afterward, Hans realizes the dragon spoke truthfully. He discovers a magically concealed chamber. Inside lie vast treasures, confirming the legends of dragon hordes. Beyond the riches already revealed, he recalls Seyfried's promise of more rewards with progress. Among the findings is a book detailing artifacts. Artifacts are items permanently imbued with magic. Such objects are rare now that magic has faded. His current level, Hans cannot yet create artifacts himself. Realizing the shelves contain manuals about these items, he observes that 10 artifacts are displayed in the room, each accompanied by a guidebook, enabling Hans to select the most useful artifacts for his needs. First item Hans selects is called Spring Afternoon, a relic crafted by a 7th Circle Archmage for his ailing wife and imbued with restorative magic. While healing spells are rarely perfect, this artifact enhances vitality, making it ideal for helping his fragile mother. Second treasure he chooses bears the name Dance of Shadows, forged by the Red Dragon Berestein. Its appearance is modest, yet its effectiveness is extraordinary. When Hans equips it, a faint crimson aura envelops his body. The relic contains a masterful concealment enchantment that renders the wearer nearly undetectable. Even standing before a mirror, Hans sees no reflection. Steps make no sound, and his body feels light as air under its influence. The usefulness of these artifacts excites him greatly. The third object he selects is named Breath of Earth. It is shaped like a coiled serpent. It is the sole artifact personally created by Seyfried. This treasure grants Hans what he has long lacked, the power of teleportation. Through it, he can activate the warp ability. Its coordinates are fixed to the lair, allowing him to slip away from the castle unnoticed by Regina or Almond. With travel no longer a burden, he feels his training will progress smoothly. Hans admits he finds immense joy in honing his abilities. After finishing his practice, he mounts his horse to return home. He knows this will be his final ride to Compton Mountain. Now that teleportation is possible, he is relieved to see the mountains seemingly empty. Yet before finishing that thought, he encounters armed troops. The sight of soldiers there leaves him stunned. He identifies himself as the Lord and demands to know why they entered his territory without notice. The leading knight mocks him as a mere child, claiming rumors of Callista's youthful lord are true. He introduces himself as Count Pete Ross, commander of the 1st Imperial Knights. Hans calmly reminds Pete that despite age differences, they share equal rank and must address each other with respect. Pete is surprised by Hans's boldness. Hans then asks directly why he has come, prompting Pete to speak bluntly. Pete explains that Count Rodriguez has rebelled and must be executed, presenting an imperial letter as proof. By order of the Emperor, Callista must assist with men and resources. Hearing the name, Hans instantly recognizes Leisha de Rodriguez. Leisha was a sword prodigy who became a master at 16, but died tragically amid accusations of treason. Rumor once claimed he and the Emperor had been childhood companions. Bond fractured after the prince ascended the throne. The McCarthy and Townsend houses manipulated the inexperienced emperor and removed his allies. It was during that turmoil that Rodriguez was falsely accused. Later proven innocent, his family had already been destroyed, leaving the empire to mourn a gifted youth lost to political schemes. Armed with this knowledge, Hans resolves to change fate and protect Leisha. Pete interrupts his thoughts, explaining Leisha is wounded and fled into the mountains. Hans agrees to cooperate, but suggests postponing the search until morning due to darkness. Pete arrogantly insists his men are capable enough to continue. Hans points out the terrain is treacherous and unsuited for heavy armor or horseback pursuit. Notes that Pete's soldiers already show signs of fatigue. Hans convinces him to resume at dawn, recalling a similar past incident when Callista aided Townsend. The mountains are notoriously unforgiving, and Hans admits only luck and foresight led him to the lair before. Locating a wounded fugitive within a day would be nearly impossible. After persuading Pete, Hans secretly begins searching for Leisha himself. He casts a wide detection spell over the region. After significant effort, he finally senses Leisha's location. Riding there swiftly, he finds the young man unconscious and gravely injured. The wounds are severe and lacking strong healing magic. He relies instead on the Spring Afternoon artifact. Though its power is limited, it offers better hope than none. He slips the ring onto Leisha's finger, activating its restorative effect. Hans then casts feathering to lighten Leisha's body and lift him onto the horse. He has already decided he will not let Leisha die. With Leisha secured, Hans rides full speed toward the estate. Nearing the gates, notices Imperial troops have arrived, their banner flying prominently. Remaining composed, Hans prepares to act carefully. He activates the invisibility artifact to conceal both himself and Leisha from sight. The town is plastered with wanted posters. Citizens whisper anxiously about the news. Posters provide clear details for identification. They highlight Leisha's gray hair and deep blue eyes. Inside the castle, Pete behaves with open disrespect. He scoffs at the castle's modest appearance and openly insults the estate. He jokes that the castle would serve better as an inn, laughing with his knights while servants attend them. His insults extend even toward the staff. He berates Claude over trivial matters, forcing the servant to apologize humbly. Gina enters, urging Pete to avoid unnecessary aggression. She reminds him the castle hosts unexpected guests and asks him to overlook minor inconveniences. Pete sneers at her and demands her identity, which she states confidently, mocks the notion of children managing an estate, claiming adults should lead. He even calls Regina an embarrassment. Her anger flares at the insult. He firmly asserts her authority as representative of the territory. Pete did not expect such defiance. He mutters that arrogance runs through the Callista bloodline. Regina secretly wishes her brother would appear to intervene. Meanwhile, Hans slips unnoticed into his room, all thanks to the concealment artifact. He even passed Regina during her argument without being seen. Hans vows to resolve matters once Leisha is secure, aware the situation has grown delicate. With posters everywhere and knights filling the castle, hiding Leisha seems impossible. His injuries demand urgent care, and Hans fears losing him. At that moment, Madeline enters to clean, unaware anyone is inside. He gasps upon seeing Hans. Quickly apologizing, she explains she thought the room empty. Hans gently asks her to stay quiet. Recognizing opportunity, he decides to involve her. Instructs her to discreetly summon Allman. Soon Allman arrives, surprised that Hans has returned unnoticed. Allman urges him to attend the lobby where Pete awaits. Hans delays and says he must show them something first. He leads them to his bed, where Leisha lies unconscious. Both servants stare in shock at the wanted rebel in their lord's chamber. Allman asks if Hans captured the traitor alone. Hans calmly replies that Leisha is no traitor and was framed, though he cannot yet explain everything. Even so, Hans declares that he has chosen to shield the young man. He asks for their assistance in safeguarding Leisha, admitting he cannot manage the task alone. His request leaves both of them momentarily speechless in shock. Hans is aware they must be questioning the reason behind Callista's involvement. After all, he is merely a provincial lord without imperial connections, now entangling himself with a dominant house like the Rodriguez family. Moreover, Allman and Madeline are servants, individuals raised to follow the commands of nobles without hesitation. From another angle, they could easily report everything to Pete, who also holds noble authority. Despite these dangers, Hans informs Madeline he will station her in his chambers so he can personally look after Leisha. Madeline quickly points out that she lacks any expertise in treating injuries. Hans tells her that is fine, explaining she only needs to cleanse Leisha's wounds and provide food, and he vows to compensate her handsomely for her help. Then faces Allman and requests an enormous favor from him. Hans instructs Allman to locate a body resembling Leisha, ideally a young man of similar build with gray hair, eye color being optional, and even Allman is left stunned by such an order. Hans recognizes how unreasonable the demand must sound and understands its difficulty. Still, he insists that rescuing Leisha is non-negotiable. He knows the servants likely still doubt him, since no one expects such a drastic transformation from him. In their eyes, he has always been a spoiled tyrant who frightened his staff, and he fears this request might even push them toward betrayal. Even so, he can only trust that they will believe he has genuinely changed. Hans tells Allman that for now, all he asks is their faith in him. After a tense pause, Allman finally speaks, acknowledging the hierarchy within the nobility. Though imperial orders outrank all others, Allman states that he serves only a single master. That master is Count Callista, and Hans is astonished by the depth of Allman's loyalty. Allman then questions whether Hans is acting under pressure, wanting confirmation that the choice to protect Leisha was truly his own. Hans understands the concern, recalling Flynn's remark that someone his age could easily be manipulated. Allman adds that he must be certain no outside force influenced Hans before agreeing to assist, a testament to his unwavering devotion. Hans cannot help resenting that Adrian once cast aside someone as dependable as Allman. He answers firmly, assuring Allman that the decision was made of his own will. He further explains that this choice will ultimately serve both the territory and its people. Satisfied, Allman bows to the Count and promises to obtain the requested body. Following his lead, Madeline also vows to fulfill her part to the best of her ability. Hans feels relieved that he has won their support. Soon after, knights attempt to inspect Owen's chamber, only to find Regina blocking their way. She informs them the room belongs to her mother and firmly tells them to withdraw. Fortunately, Hans arrives in time to step into the situation. He questions why armed soldiers are entering the Countess's sick room with weapons in hand. Soldier replies that he heard the Callista family had agreed to cooperate, which Hans does not deny. However, he clarifies that cooperation meant providing lodging and manpower, not consenting to a search of private quarters. He challenges the soldier to show where the decree authorizes a search of the castle. Realizing he has no grounds, the soldier reluctantly retreats. Regina expresses relief at seeing Hans and asks if he is safe with a traitor at large. Hans reassures her and apologizes for arriving late. He also praises her for how she handled Pete earlier. Regina is taken aback, knowing Hans was supposedly absent during her exchange with Pete. Catching his slip, Hans smoothly shifts the topic before she can probe further. He suggests they go inside to check on their mother. Within their mother's chamber, the Countess cautions her children to stay vigilant, with a traitor roaming their lands. He urges them to cooperate fully with the Imperial Knights to avoid trouble. Unaware, Hans has already stepped beyond that boundary. Hans reassures her that troops have been dispatched, and given the fugitive's injuries, he will soon be captured. He fabricates a story about encountering an elderly foreign woman during his travels. According to him, he aided her and received a ring filled with special energy and gratitude, claiming it will gradually restore his mother's health. Owen is surprised, never imagining her son believed in such tales, and Hans admits he may not, yet he still wishes to gift her the lovely ring. He slips the ring onto her finger, and it immediately begins to function. Owen beams, confessing she already feels revitalized, leaving Regina astonished. Examining the gem, Owen identifies it as yellow sapphire, and quickly realizes the ornament must be exceedingly valuable. Only Hans knows its true price. Aware that chaos would erupt if anyone discovered it surpasses the value of a castle. Following day, Leisha remains in recovery. Hans and Madeline alternate watch over him, she during daylight and he through the night. Having once lived as a servant, sleepless nights are familiar to Hans, and with the dragon heart within him, he feels little exhaustion. Even so, his concern lies entirely with Leisha. He worries the deep wound may not heal on its own despite cleaning away blood and pus. Suddenly, 5 knocks sound at the door, the signal he and Madeline agreed upon to identify themselves. Since secrecy is vital, Madeline enters quietly carrying a bundle of herbs. Hans is startled by the sight. Madeline explains that Leisha's external injuries are severe. Therefore, she brought herbs known for disinfecting and aiding recovery. Curious, Hans asks how she learned about such remedies, and she reveals her father was an herbalist whom she observed closely. Hans recalls her mentioning she could brew herbal tea, never realizing her knowledge extended far beyond that. Madeline begins crushing the herbs. She carefully applies the mixture to Leisha's wounds and bandages them. Hans feels fortunate to have someone with healer-like skills by his side. Watching her efforts, he silently prays for Leisha's recovery. Days pass without improvement, and after 5 full days of effort, Leisha still has not awakened. Later, Madeline heads toward the room again. Upon entering, she freezes in shock. Leisha is nowhere to be seen, and she rushes off to alert Hans. Unbeknownst to her, Leisha has woken and is concealed behind a chair. Hidden in his cover, he overhears soldiers outside making an important announcement. They claim Leisha's corpse has been discovered in the mountains. The news leaves Leisha stunned. What he does not realize is that Hans is already inside the room. Using his invisibility artifact, Hans approaches without being detected. He reveals himself by calling Leisha's name, feigning surprise at his awakening. In reality, Hans sensed the change in Leisha's breathing thanks to his dragon heart and knew he was awake, but he pretended otherwise, understanding Leisha's caution. Given his status as a fugitive, it is only natural that Leisha panicked upon waking in an unfamiliar room tended by strangers. Hans recognizes that such circumstances would make anyone distrustful. Leisha proves this by pointing a charcoal poker at him. He demands Hans' identity and whether he belongs to the troops outside. Though Hans speaks calmly, Leisha warns him not to advance. Hans urges him to relax, reminding him he is still wounded. He proposes they sit and discuss everything properly. Leisha reluctantly sits, but keeps the weapon within reach as a precaution. Hans understands that only his words and demeanor can prove he poses no threat. He explains the situation in detail, and Leisha's first question concerns the reported corpse, astonished to learn it was a substitute arranged by Hans. Hans admits he dressed the body in Leisha's clothes and placed his signet ring on it. He apologizes for using those belongings without consent, and when Leisha notes Pete knows his face too well to be fooled, Hans replies that he accounted for that. The August rains falling, he left the body in a swamp to hasten natural decay. The weary knights and an impatient Pete were eager to conclude the search, allowing Hans to successfully mislead them. Hans advises Leisha to remain hidden for 5 years within the territory, promising that by then his name will be vindicated. Leisha reacts defensively, questioning how Hans knew of his false accusation and suspecting his involvement, but Hans refuses to reveal everything for now. Leisha presses him about what is supposed to happen after 5 years, yet Hans refuses to reveal anything further and simply asks him to place his trust in him. Leisha is not satisfied with that answer, though he admits he is grateful for the help Hans has given. He explains that he cannot hand over his life to someone who withholds crucial information, and Hans understands because Leisha was betrayed and falsely labeled a traitor. Knowing that Leisha now sees enemies everywhere, Hans decides he must approach things carefully and casts an illusion spell. The magic alters Leisha's hair and eye color, leaving him stunned and convinced such a feat should be impossible. Performing an advanced illusion so effortlessly right before his eyes is beyond belief. Hans even chants no incantation, accomplishing something Imperial Court mages struggle with as if it were trivial. Seeing Leisha frozen in shock, Hans calls out to snap him back to attention. He explains that many matters must remain secret and acknowledges Leisha's caution, yet swears he has no desire to harm him or the Emperor. Hans earnestly pleads for trust, and after a long silence, Leisha reluctantly agrees to believe him for the time being. Hans feels relieved, noticing the hostility in Leisha's eyes has lessened. Once heard Leisha was gentle by nature, though recent events have clearly hardened him. Hans imagines himself cornered like prey before a feral cat, understanding Leisha's tension. Long after, Pete delivers news of Leisha's supposed death to the Emperor. He anticipates praise and satisfaction from the throne. Instead, the Emperor remains restrained and unreadable. Pete reminds him that Leisha allegedly plotted to poison him and his family. To satisfy Pete, the Emperor feigns pleasure at the accomplishment. Content with the approval he receives, Pete withdraws. Once alone, the Emperor collapses into despair. Clutching his head, he laments how events unfolded. In his sorrow, he vows to one day restore Leisha's tarnished name. Back in Callista, Leisha gradually adapts to his new life, as Hans presents him as a newly hired guard during a meeting in the study. Regina attends as well, though she watches Leisha with suspicion. She quietly asks Alman if there is anything strange about him, and Alman assures her everything is normal. She lies, claiming Hans encountered Leisha while traveling. Alman inquires whether something truly troubles her, and Regina insists nothing is wrong, yet her gaze lingers on Leisha. Observing his posture and demeanor, Regina concludes he carries himself like nobility, which makes her uneasy about why such a man would guard a distant territory. The two shift focus to the purpose of Hans' meeting, unaware of his intentions, while Leisha quietly admires Hans' effort to conceal his identity. Aside from Hans, Madeline, and Alman, no one else in the castle knows who he truly is. Leisha worries about the people in the castle, but most of all, keeps an eye on Hans, surprised by how competently he manages everything. Though Hans assumed leadership at 12 without prior experience, his handling of the fake corpse scheme leaves Leisha impressed. Beyond that, Hans interacts skillfully with everyone around him. Leisha even feels Hans shows greater maturity than himself and admires the estate's organization. The servants perform their duties cheerfully, a rare sight even in the capital, making it hard to believe a 15-year-old oversees it all. Leisha cannot help wondering who Hans truly is. Within 10 minutes of entering, Hans fills the board with an audacious proposal. The room erupts in disbelief when he declares his plan to establish a bank. Leisha shouts that such an endeavor requires immense capital and warns many have gone bankrupt attempting it. Hans calmly responds that he understands why others fail and explains a bank is more than land and money. He states the true difficulty lies in building a capable workforce. We need asset managers, investment evaluators, accountants, and reliable guards, yet Callista lacks the connections to recruit such talent. Therefore, Hans proposes founding an academy to train locals, dividing it into accounting and security departments. As he outlines the plan, Leisha recognizes the thorough preparation, though he still doubts its practicality. Regina raises a key concern, pointing out commoners cannot afford tuition since education is usually reserved for nobles. Hans assures her he intends to charge nothing, shocking Alman with the idea of free instruction. He corrects Alman by saying the attendees will not be mere students but paid trainees, whose staff wages will be adjusted during training. Smiling, Hans announces they will earn money while studying. Alman, Regina, and Leisha are left speechless by this revelation. Leisha realizes Hans is entirely serious. Soon after, Alman gathers the servants to explain the initiative. He outlines the academy's structure to support the future Callista Bank and invites interested staff to volunteer as the first trainees. Claude eagerly asks whether they will truly be paid, and Alman confirms it while noting their regular wages will decrease slightly during training. He reassures them the reduction will not impact their living expenses. Excitement spreads among the servants, with many choosing accounting and others opting for security roles. Claude is astonished, knowing academies traditionally serve nobles. He wonders how commoners like them could possibly master such subjects. Madeline reminds him of his mathematical talent and efficiency, urging him to try despite his doubts about whether education will change his fate. After reflecting, Madeline reveals she plans to leave the estate. Claude is stunned by her announcement. She explains Hans rewarded her assistance by sponsoring her medical studies. Though initially overwhelmed, the current changes inspire her to accept the opportunity. She recalls Leisha's heartfelt gratitude after she saved him. That moment filled her with pride and purpose. It convinced her she could aim higher. Even if daunting, she wants to pursue the challenge. She encourages Claude to seize his own chance as well. Her words resonate deeply, and Claude acknowledges her reasoning. He ultimately signs up for the accounting course. Still, uncertainty lingers within him. He fears he may not measure up. With recent salary increases, he wonders if remaining a servant would have been easier. When he hands his exam to instructor Poitier praises his excellent work, and though Claude downplays it, the instructor insists it is exceptional. He explains that while basic arithmetic is common, true bookkeeping skill is rare, even among brilliant nobles, yet Claude mastered it. Poitier admits he doubted the appointment at first, but Claude's performance has restored his confidence. He declares with certainty that Claude will become an outstanding accountant. Claude hesitates to believe such praise. Remembering Hans' sacrifices for their growth, he resolves to strive earnestly. Meanwhile, at security training, Hans is astonished. See trainees enduring punishments under Leisha's command. Leisha berates them harshly, calling them worthless. Earlier, they had arrived with arrogance and swagger. They behaved disrespectfully toward Leisha until he decisively defeated them to assert authority. Having proven his strength, the humbled trainees obey. Though Leisha tells Hans the security recruits are little more than ruffians compared to the promising accounting group, doubts investing time in such people will yield results. Noticing his lack of enthusiasm, Hans pulls him aside for a private conversation. Hans reminds Leisha of his skill in instructing the Emperor in swordsmanship, to which Leisha replies the Emperor was willing to learn. Leisha questions comparing a king to commoners. Hans clarifies he only meant Leisha is an exceptional mentor, and notes Callista lacks knights aside from the aging Oswald. Hans boldly asserts that a king is no different from ordinary people. He argues that noble or not, all are human, and the difference lies in who nurtures their potential. Believing Leisha the ideal instructor for this moment, Hans' conviction strikes him deeply. Leisha recognizes the strength of Hans' resolve. He agrees but requests additional time and resources, which Hans readily promises to provide. Leisha then notices Hans has grown noticeably more casual in speaking with him. When they first encountered each other, Hans behaved nothing like this. Now, however, the uneasiness he once showed seems to have completely disappeared. Hans tells Leisha that he trusts him deeply, which is why he speaks so openly around him. Leisha has grown tired of Hans constantly praising him. Without another word, he turns and heads back toward the training field. Upon arriving, Leisha pauses in surprise and at the same time feels a surge of admiration at the sight before him. Nearly all the trainees remain frozen in the exact stance he ordered before leaving to speak with Hans. Recalling Hans' words about recognizing people's potential, Leisha smiles faintly and decides to dedicate himself fully to shaping these so-called delinquents. He orders the students to stand up immediately. He explains that true strength is not built on muscle or swagger, but on resilience and determination. He praises their endurance in remaining despite punishment, and urges them to remember this lesson before restarting the session with renewed intensity. Leisha once feared he would spend 5 dull years in hiding, yet he now feels grateful to have a purpose. In the year 853, the Callista Academy was officially founded to pave the way for the future Callista Bank. It consisted of accounting and security branches, accepting only local commoners, and before long 3 full years had passed. 3 years later, Hans' mother has recovered remarkably thanks to the artifact. For the first time in ages, she steps outside her chamber. Regina anxiously checks on her, but she gently reassures her daughter that she feels well. She admits she longed for the fragrance of the outdoors and wished to breathe it in once more. Smiling brightly, Owen invites Regina to accompany her on a walk. During these 3 years, many positive changes have unfolded across the territory, including Owen's renewed vitality. In another part of town, tax officials confront a woman and demand an outrageous sum in taxes. The woman stands bewildered, unable to comprehend how she could possibly pay such an amount. As the heated exchange continues, her son steps outside to intervene. To their surprise, the son is Claude, now well-versed in finance after 3 years of study, dressed sharply and confidently correcting the officials on the updated tax codes. In the collectors attempt to argue, Claude calmly cites the reduced rate for low-income households, proving his mother qualifies and forcing them to reconsider. With no grounds to continue, the officials retreat. Claude warns that any further misconduct will result in a formal complaint, sending them scurrying away in embarrassment before he expresses frustration at lingering corruption. His mother worries for his safety, but Claude reassures her firmly. The elderly woman fears retaliation from the authorities. She urges him not to provoke them further. Claude confidently replies that Hands will handle any trouble that arises. Meanwhile, inside the castle, a newly hired maid knocks repeatedly on Hands' door, but receives no response. He persists until a senior maid approaches. The older maid points to the X mark hanging on the door and explains that no one may disturb Hands when it is displayed. The younger maid asks what he could be doing inside, yet even the senior maid admits ignorance. He adds that not even Leisha may enter when the sign is posted. What they do not know is that, whenever the mark appears, Hands has already slipped away to the hidden lair to train. There he advances his level and finally reunites with Seyfried after 3 silent years. Dragon expresses clear admiration for Hands' growth. Hands has now reached the 6th circle of magic, a feat surpassing even the Imperial Court mage, who stands at the 5th circle. Seyfried observes that Hands has fully synchronized with the dragon heart, granting him access to wide-scale spells. Pleased, the dragon pats him fondly for his rapid progress over 3 years. Seyfried inquires whether Hands has taken on any apprentices, leaving Hands confused. Dragon explains that powerful mages traditionally pass on their knowledge and hopes Hands will continue his legacy through disciples, though he emphasizes the choice is his. He reminds Hands that the power belongs to him now, and he is free to decide its future. Over the years, Hands has unlocked additional chambers within the lair. These chambers contain vast treasures, riches he could sell for immense wealth, yet he shows no interest. He refuses because exploiting them would betray Seyfried's true legacy. Instead, Hands shares his ambition to establish a bank. Seyfried initially mistakes the idea for predatory moneylending. Hands clarifies the difference patiently. He promises that once the bank thrives and generates sufficient capital, he will found a genuine magic academy to honor Seyfried's heritage. Hands criticizes modern academies as hollow institutions where few pursue magic seriously, since advancing beyond the early circles is nearly unheard of, and the art has faded into obscurity. With the Dragonheart's strength within him, Hands intends to restore magic and cultivate countless successors. Seyfried is delighted by this determination. He encourages Hands to pursue the vision wholeheartedly. Hands then departs from the lair, seeking to the sky through magic. He surveys his land from above, satisfied with 3 years of steady progress. Preparations for launching the bank are advancing smoothly as well. He recalls Leisha's suggestion about equipping knights with proper plate armor and longswords. Acknowledging that warriors need adequate protection, Hands agrees. Alista once neglected heavy armaments due to its peaceful and underdeveloped nature. Now the circumstances have shifted, and Hands understands the importance of preparing before conflict arises. He begins scanning nearby mountains, searching for iron ore deposits to support their plans. While surveying the terrain, he suddenly notices a distant golden glow. Intrigued by something he has never seen before, Hands moves closer to investigate. There he discovers an injured feline-like creature lying helplessly. He heals it with magic, admires its unusual beauty, and decides to bring it home. This small decision leads to an unexpected development because the creature transforms into a human inside Hands' room. The night before, Hands had noticed the feline weakening in his arms, so he carried it to the lair to place it within the healing circle. He avoided using the circle for Leisha to protect the lair's secrecy, but felt safe treating the animal and releasing it afterward. He gently sets the creature within the glowing formation. Healing magic restores its wounds. Hands expects it to awaken within 10 minutes. Instead, it remains unconscious for 3 hours, forcing Hands to take it home until it recovers. He plans to release it at dawn before his routine breakfast with Leisha, now serving as his guard knight. He lays the kitten carefully on his bed for comfort. The next morning, Hands screams loudly, startling Leisha. Leisha rushes to the door and demands entry. Hands blocks the entrance, stunned by the sight before him. The feline he rescued had transformed into a grown man overnight, prompting his terrified shout. Hands hastily claims he saw a bug to dismiss Leisha and postpones breakfast to later. Turning back, he demands to know the stranger's identity. First, Hands fails to connect the man to the cat he saved, until the stranger shifts back into feline form. Witnessing the transformation confirms Hands' suspicion that he is dealing with a member of the feline folk. Feline folk are an elusive race secluded from humans, as ancient as elves and dwarves, rarely seen and scarcely understood due to their secrecy. The Catman casually explores the room, then boldly announces he intends to remain there. Hans protests, bewildered since he never granted permission. The feline counters that Hans was the one who brought him home in the first place. The feline insists Hans abducted him and healed his injuries without consent, then boldly declares that Hans must now take responsibility for him. Hans quickly realizes the Catman is both assertive and sly in his approach. He points out that the feline would have perished had his wounds been ignored. Considering feline folk possess strength beyond humans, Hans deduces no ordinary person could have injured him and asks if another of his kind was responsible. The question strikes deeply, and the feline falls silent, implying the guess may be correct. As Hans attempts to close the distance, Leisha suddenly storms into the room. The abrupt entrance startles both of them. Without hesitation, Leisha draws his blade and orders the feline to step away from Hans. He positions himself protectively in front of Hans, sword aimed directly at Asura. That moment Hans recalls that Leisha is a swordmaster, meaning he can sense the unusual aura radiating from the feline. Enraged, the Catman lifts his hand, prepared to retaliate. Fearing they will clash, Hans activates Blink, instantly placing himself between the two. Both stop just in time, unwilling to injure Hans. Once the tension eases, Hans urges Leisha to relax. He explains that Asura is dealing with personal trouble and will stay temporarily, pleading for understanding, an act that astonishes the feline. With a hardened expression, Leisha demands why a feline folk roams the human realm, and Hans replies it is private. Leisha angrily reminds Hans of his duty as his guard knight. He reprimands him for recklessly sheltering a stranger and for stepping before his blade, yet Hans calmly insists he trusted them not to harm him. Asura is once again taken aback by Hans' words. Leisha continues warning about the danger of feline folk until Asura cuts him off. He bluntly introduces himself as Asura and smiles upon finally learning his name. He suggests they set aside hostility and shake hands. Reluctantly, both comply. Thus, Hans unexpectedly gains 2 allies in the Compton Mountains. Curious about Asura's past, Hans chooses patience, unwilling to pressure someone who barely survived. Still concerned about harmony between the two, the trio continues their daily lives. Asura frequently pesters Leisha, sometimes demanding snacks without warning. Leisha grows irritated that Asura seems to do nothing but eat and nap. Despite this, Hans continues to indulge him, much to Leisha's annoyance. Soon Hans announces preparations are complete to launch the Bank of Callista. Excitedly, he reveals the inaugural branch will open in the capital. Financially speaking, the wealthiest individual in the kingdom is neither emperor nor duke. Instead, it is Baronet Dominic Sullivan. As founder of the empire's earliest banking enterprise, Dominic has dominated the industry ever since. Many nobles attempted to rival him, yet none could break his monopoly. At home, Dominic listens to his assistant's report, cigar in hand, requesting the updates by priority. He learns Duke McCarthy has summoned him regarding imperial protocol. Recognizing the gravity of a royal summons, he orders the meeting set for the afternoon. Another report follows concerning Count Chenevis requesting an additional month to consider a proposal. Lastly, he hears of a new bank opening in the capital under House Callista with a single branch. Dismissing them as insignificant rural nobles, Dominic assumes their venture will soon collapse. Though outwardly unconcerned, he quietly plans to investigate possible hidden backing. Meanwhile, in the capital, the newly opened bank draws massive crowds. Such enthusiasm is unusual for a financial institution, yet its unique model sparks curiosity. Hans Bank charges only 1 copper coin to open an account. Additionally, loans are issued without demanding collateral. Traditional banks require at least 1 gold coin and equal-valued security, excluding commoners who cannot meet such standards. Callista Bank instead provides personalized savings advice based on each customer's income. Loan approvals rely on income assessment and credit evaluation. Borrowers receive manageable amounts aligned with their repayment ability. Even elderly clients unable to read receive assistance. Staff patiently guide every visitor through the process. The institution finally grants financial access to the poor. It considers each client's purpose for opening an account and their future plans, enabling tailored guidance. A hesitant woman steps inside uncertain about registering. She is astonished when her account is approved smoothly. Afterward, she receives an unexpected raffle ticket. All new clients during the first month receive tickets to place in a draw for prizes after 30 days. The grand prize is 25 gold coins, second place 10, and third place 5. Gasps fill the hall at the announcement. Customers rush forward eager to secure their own tickets. Observing from the lobby stand Ullman and Claude. Ullman praises Claude's creativity. The raffle strategy was Claude's brainchild. He also introduced credit rating concepts after discussions with fellow trainees. Shortly after, they receive confirmation they achieved 100 new accounts on the first day with hours remaining. Claude is stunned, especially as 30 loan requests have already been filed. Ullman predicts Hans will be thrilled and wishes he could witness it firsthand. The locally trained bankers and guards perform admirably. They have created an inclusive bank exactly as Hans envisioned. News of the success soon reaches Hans in Callista. He feels proud hearing of Alman and Claude's achievements. Sharing drinks with his mother and sister, he announces the milestone and plans generous bonuses for his staff. Gina is delighted, yet still amazed her brother runs a bank. Hans then asks if she would consider starting her own venture. He recalls her background in management studies. He wonders where she might apply those skills. Promising full support, he encourages her, though she admits no clear idea comes to mind. She doubts her talent compared to Hans and feels uncertain about her role in Callista. Hans proposes traveling to the capital. He informs Leisha and Asura of the plan as well. Leisha is surprised but willing to accompany them. For 3 years he has faithfully served as Hans, guard knight. With 2 years remaining until his name is cleared, Hans worries about risks in the capital yet hopes for the best. Turning to Asura to ask his thoughts, Asura leaps onto Hans enthusiastically before he finishes speaking. Leisha scolds him for the reckless behavior. He warns Hans' body is fragile, but Asura stubbornly ignores both of them. As departure approaches, Hans silently prays everything proceeds smoothly. When the journey begins, Regina is surprised Hans chooses a separate carriage. Hans explains he cannot trust Asura and Leisha alone together, yet promises to follow closely, noting the trip will take at least a month. Hans knows he cannot risk leaving those 2 hard-headed men alone together. Regina recalls that Hans supposedly met them during his travels, and begins wondering how he keeps picking up strays on his tour. She even starts questioning whether the healing ring truly came from an old woman. An awkward silence follows as Hans struggles for an answer, then quickly excuses himself and tells Regina to call if anything happens. Regina later complains to their mother that Hans is hiding too many things. Owen gently advises her not to overthink it, saying they must simply wait until Hans is ready to share. That settled, the family sets off toward the capital. After a month of travel, they finally reach the city. Asura can barely contain himself and starts bouncing inside the carriage. Leisha tells him to sit still as the carriage rattles, but Asura's excitement overflows. Hans understands Leisha's discomfort, since this city holds different meanings for each of them. For Leisha, it is not new adventure, but a painful reminder of betrayal. Asura keeps acting recklessly, and even swings the carriage door open mid-ride. Annoyed, Leisha smacks him lightly on the head for his stubbornness. The two begin bickering again, and Hans wonders when peace will ever come between them, convinced that leaving them unsupervised would spell disaster. Soon they arrive at the Callista townhouse, where Alman greets them warmly. A townhouse is a residence nobles maintain in major cities, and since House Callista never owned one before, this marks their first. Though modest rather than grand, it suits their needs for now. Adeline has returned from medical training, and now serves as Owen's personal physician. After surveying the place, Hans suspects he will spend more time here than in Callista, though he has arranged safeguards back home. Barely settled, Hans prepares to head to the bank, surprising Alman. Alman urges him to rest after the long journey, but Hans insists that as the owner he must inspect operations personally, allowing Regina and Owen to relax instead. Asura instantly begs to tag along when he sees Hans leaving with Leisha, and despite Hans' attempts to refuse, Asura stubbornly insists. When Hans reaches the bank, he is astonished by the packed hall, as Ullman explains the crowd gathered for the promised lottery drawing. The third prize goes to ticket number 318, and the winner erupts in joy. Spectators gasp in disbelief that the bank truly honors its word. Guards struggle to control the swelling crowd, unused to such turnout, and Ullman apologizes while Hans prioritizes safety. Despite the chaos, Hans feels deeply impressed. He had not expected such seamless success. With the place overflowing, Leisha suggests leaving, and Hans agrees, satisfied with what he witnessed. Hans then proposes they celebrate with some shopping. They head into a clothing store. Asura marvels at how different it is from shops in Callista. Hans encourages both Asura and Leisha to choose whatever they like. Promises to cover the cost as a welcome celebration. Asura quickly notices a striking fabric. He eagerly selects it, admiring the intricate design. He tells Hans he wants it, and when asked if he plans to tailor it into clothing, Asura declines, preferring to wear it as is. Explains that in his homeland they drape cloth around themselves, and once wrapped, it suits him beautifully. After paying for Asura's choice, Hans turns to Leisha and asks if he wants anything, but he refuses. Leisha claims knights have no need for fancy attire. Hans suggests upgrading his sword instead. Leisha still declines, and Hans senses something off. Asked, Leisha says he is fine, though Hans suspects the capital weighs heavily on him. As they chat, a knight commander overhears them in passing. Hearing Leisha's voice, the commander turns around. He thinks it resembles Laquia Rodriguez, but lacks proof. Back at the bank, commoners are startled when a noble enters, and inside the office manager Poitier speaks with him. The noble's request exceeds Poitier's authority. He demands a meeting with the bank's owner directly. Introducing himself as Duran von Chennevis, eldest son of Count Chennevis, he makes his case. He requires a loan of 7,000 gold, shocking Hans and Poitier. Sum equals millions in modern terms, and Poitier doubts how such an amount can be managed. Earlier, Hans had been heading back to the townhouse when summoned urgently to meet this important client. Now he faces Duran's staggering request. Hans calmly asks how the funds will be used, surprising Duran. Though acknowledging Duran's noble rank, Hans explains such a large loan requires transparency. Duran realizes then that Callista Bank might actually supply the money. Understanding this, he speaks honestly. He recounts how the Chennevis once ranked among the empire's wealthiest, thanks to vast grain fields in Chernick. Chernick's blessed soil yielded abundant harvests with minimal effort. Their prosperity endured until the current count took control. Unfortunately, the count developed a gambling addiction. He squandered liquid assets and then staked family treasures in desperate attempts to recover losses. Eventually, he even mortgaged the estate itself. The accumulated debt now totals 7,000 gold. Sullivan Bank is the only institution capable of lending such a sum, but it demands Chernick as collateral. Since Chernick is their lifeblood, surrendering it is unthinkable. Hans reflects that with sound management, Chernick could repay debts within years. After listening carefully, Hans asks Duran to wait while he consults staff. He steps outside with Poitier. Inside, Duran assumes rejection is inevitable. Poitier warns that pledging Chernick would doom the Chennevis. Hans questions this reasoning. Poitier explains Sullivan would sabotage repayment to seize Chernick outright. Their struggle with Sullivan is already well known in the capital. Nevertheless, Poitier insists lending without collateral is reckless. Hans strains his mind, searching for a solution. Though the Lair's treasures allow him to fund the loan, he refuses careless generosity. He will not spend vast sums out of impulse or vanity. He tries recalling events from his past life about the Chennevis, but struggles due to Callista's isolation. Still, he keeps digging through his memories. Suddenly, an idea sparks. His eyes widen with realization. Without explaining, he rushes back inside to Duran. Drawing on knowledge from his previous life, he understands that approving the loan is strategic. Hans announces Callista Bank will grant the 7,000 gold. Both Duran and Poitier stare in disbelief. Poitier attempts to protest, but Hans assures him it will succeed. He asks Poitier to leave so he can draft the contract personally. Though doubtful, Poitier complies reluctantly. Duran remains stunned in his seat. His family had endured ridicule and predatory pressure since falling into debt, yet now they receive help without collateral. Overwhelmed, Duran expresses heartfelt gratitude. Hans calmly clarifies that this loan is neither charity nor gift. Hans explains that he is presenting Duran with a proper and lawful contract. Duran responds by pointing out that the Chennevis family no longer owns any assets they could pledge as security. Hans, however, shows no sign of hesitation. He calmly sets a document down on the table. He informs Duran that he only requires 2 signed pledges from him. With that assurance, Hans agrees to release the funds to support Duran and his household. When Dominic Sullivan learns of the situation, he is filled with intense anger. He can hardly accept that an 18-year-old managed to persuade a bank to issue such an enormous loan. Based on what he knows, the Callista lands hold little value, meaning they should not generate any significant income. Yet despite that, Callista still approved the loan. He questions his aide about whether they overlooked anything regarding the Callistas, but the aide insists they have not. According to their findings, the territory is poorly developed and lacks any relics or valuable resources. This uncertainty only fuels Dominic's frustration, as he cannot comprehend how Callista gathered 70 gold. He orders a deeper investigation into the Callista household. Dominic refuses to accept that his long scheme to bankrupt Count Chernovis might collapse. After all, he orchestrated the Count's gambling habit to seize control of Chernick. Shortly afterward, Hans is delivered a letter. He has not spent much time in the capital. Correspondence is already reaching him. This is due to the sudden fame he gained after granting Duran's family the large loan. The message reveals that the Callista family has been summoned to a formal banquet. The invitation comes from Count Al von Heisper, noble they have never previously dealt with. Leisha tells Hans this is only natural, since he is currently the talk of the capital. Though Hans' bank was known for serving ordinary citizens, issuing a 70 gold loan to Duran has sparked widespread curiosity. As a result, the Callista name is surrounded by gossip and speculation. To prevent suspicion, Hans fabricates a story for Regina and Owen, claiming their late father managed investments wisely, which funded his ventures. Still, he knows he must tread carefully to avoid revealing too much. Hans then asks Leisha and Asau whether they would like to accompany him to the banquet. Both decline his invitation. Leisha's refusal comes as no surprise. However, Hans is astonished that Asau turns it down. Asau usually enjoys excitement, so skipping a party is unusual. Asau clarifies that social events do not interest him. People see him as lively because he jokes around with Hans. Tells Hans he only wants to spend time with him and no one else. For that reason, he chooses to remain home, and even Leisha is surprised to witness Asau showing restraint. The banquet hall is crowded with nobles. Some are indulging in drinks and laughter. Others are engaged in discussions about future ventures. At that moment, Hans enters alongside Regina and Owen, instantly drawing every gaze in the room. Even without introductions, most guests quickly recognize them as members of the Callista family. Many expected someone older, so they are startled by Hans' youth. They struggle to believe he founded a business at such an early age. While everyone knows about the Chernovis incident, they still wonder how a rural noble managed such a bold move. Soon, attention shifts to the elegant gowns worn by Regina and Owen. The timeless yet unique designs capture admiration. Sight prompts the young ladies to whisper among themselves, curious about which boutique crafted the dresses. One bold girl quickly approaches Regina without hesitation. Conversations begin, and before long Regina finds herself immersed in the social circle she deserves. Hans admits he attended largely for Regina's sake. He wants to introduce her to high society since she has always remained in the background. In his previous life, she carried the family while her brother was incompetent. That burden denied her friendships and leisure. This time, Hans intends to change that and allow Regina to savor the present. The dresses were sourced from the dragon's lair, which explains their exceptional appearance on the girls. Lost in thought, Hans suddenly senses two nobles standing behind him. The unexpected presence startles him, prompting the pair to apologize. They introduce themselves as Count Milligan and Viscount Roxon. Both confess admiration for Hans' innovations, especially his idea of opening accounts with only a single copper coin. Hans feels honored by their compliments and expresses sincere gratitude. Nobles inquire about the 70 gold loan granted to the Chernovis. Hans confirms the basic details, but politely refuses to disclose specifics of the agreement. Roxon presses further, attempting to gauge Hans' financial strength. Hans calmly reassures him that the bank faces no risk of insolvency. They begin discussing their own enterprises and the difficulty of obtaining capital amid the economic downturn. Seizing the opportunity, Hans informs them they are welcome to seek loans from his bank. Their discussion continues, until Hans' mother approaches in distress, saying Regina is nowhere to be found. Though anxious, Hans tells her not to panic. Owen explains she left Regina with other youths to converse, but Regina vanished suddenly. She questioned the other girls, yet none know her whereabouts. Hans reassures his mother once more and promises to locate Regina himself. He asks her to rest while he searches, assuming Regina simply wandered off, unfamiliar with such gatherings. Employing magic, Hans scans the banquet hall but finds no sign of her. He widens his search beyond the hall, yet still cannot detect her presence. When his sensing reaches the garden, he discovers Regina conversing with someone. Hans heads outside toward the garden, but as he nears, Regina's scream pierces the air, activating a spell known as haste. Hans dashes swiftly toward her location. He arrives just in time to witness a man unsheathing his sword at Regina. Shock grips Hans, as weapons are forbidden at such events, which is why Leisha had not felt the need to accompany him. Before the attacker can strike, Hans teleports directly between him and Regina. Regina stares in disbelief as her brother materializes from thin air. Casting a rejection spell, Hans knocks the weapon from the assailant's grasp. Suddenly, a surprising turn unfolds. A mage materializes, and after a brief incantation, he erects a magical barrier, separating Hans from the attacker. Hans himself is taken aback by the mage's sudden appearance. He can only wonder about the stranger's identity. Realizing he now faces a mage, Hans resolves to unleash his full strength, especially with his family threatened. Refusing to retreat, Hans fires a wind arrow toward the mage. The projectile shatters the mage's shield and streaks past him. Also passes the swordsman behind, striking the wall instead, and the sheer force breaking through leaves the mage stunned. Worried for the individual he guards, the mage urgently asks whether his majesty is unharmed. At that moment, realization dawns upon both Regina and Hans. 30 minutes earlier, before the chaos began, Regina was inside the house enjoying herself with the other girls, chatting animatedly about how Callista is nothing like the people of the capital. They were deeply engaged in that very discussion. In the midst of it, Regina glanced out the window and noticed a stunning blossom blooming in the garden. Onto its beauty, she politely excused herself from the group. She then made her way outside toward the garden. New companions felt let down by her sudden departure, especially since they had not yet asked where she had found such a lovely dress. Once in the garden, Regina fixed her gaze on the soft pink bloom. curious about what species it might be. A voice suddenly spoke from behind her, informing her that the flowers were lilacs. Startled by the unexpected comment, Regina spun around and found a young man addressing her. The man confessed his fondness for fragrances, explaining that it made him speak without hesitation, then asked whether she too admired flowers. Regina was momentarily speechless at the sight of the striking gentleman before her, but after gathering herself, she admitted she knew little about flowers, though she adored their scent, and had even considered planting them along the avenue of her estate because of their delightful aroma. The young man seemed surprised, noting that most nobles avoid planting lilacs due to their high cost, and he expanded further on her idea. He suggested that such flowers would be even more charming lining a public road, rather than hidden within enclosed gardens. Before they realized it, their thoughts began aligning effortlessly. When they noticed they were speaking in harmony, Regina blushed deeply and offered an embarrassed apology. Her cheeks flushed with excitement. She could not explain why she felt so at ease with a stranger, and only then did she realize she had yet to ask his name. She attempted to speak, but the young man began talking at the exact same moment. Coincidence only heightened the awkward tension between the two. Regina eventually voiced her wish to learn his name just as he prepared to answer. Suddenly, he noticed a snake slithering through the grass toward Regina. Regina caught sight of it as well and let out a terrified scream. Reacting instantly, the young man drew his sword to strike the reptile down. At that precise moment, Hans appeared, assuming his sister was in danger, and teleported between them, crushing the snake underfoot without even noticing. It quickly became clear that the young man had meant no harm, and that everything was a misunderstanding. Realizing their mistake, Regina and Hans lowered their heads in apology, unaware they were addressing the Emperor, though he bore no resentment. He recognized that the confusion stemmed from unfortunate timing. The young man was in fact Crowell III, the reigning Emperor of Rosenbaum. He carried a blade because royal protocol permits only members of the imperial family to bear weapons at formal banquets. To add to the spectacle, his protector was none other than the imperial archmage Rumbly Ivan, master of the continent's highest-tier magic, known as Level 5. The disturbance drew nearby soldiers who hurried over, but Crowell had no desire to be seen or to let the matter grow larger. Sensing the Emperor's reluctance, Hans swiftly cast a mirage barrier to mislead the approaching guards. The soldiers soon arrived at the location. Finding nothing unusual, they turned and headed elsewhere. Convinced the noise had come from another direction, they eventually dispersed. Hans explained to Crowell that he erected the illusion to spare him further trouble, speaking calmly, while Regina panicked behind him since she never knew her brother possessed magic. As if matters were not overwhelming enough, Ivan suddenly seized Hans, utterly astonished by the spell he had just witnessed. Mirage was classified as Level 6 magic, and Hans had cast it silently without an incantation, leaving Ivan doubting his own senses, though he was certain he had heard no chant. Crowell gently tapped Ivan's shoulder, trying to rein in the archmage's excitement. The Emperor expressed his gratitude to Hans and asked for both his and Regina's names, while Ivan still struggled to contain his amazement. Hans and Regina formally introduced themselves. Hearing their identities, Crowell realized they were the siblings currently drawing attention throughout society. Hans, however, knew that Crowell was widely regarded as a figure controlled by Townsend and McCarthy, lacking strong supporters and avoiding close ties with noble houses, which explained his rare public appearances. As anticipated, Crowell and Ivan soon departed, with the Emperor expressing hope for a longer conversation in the future. Hans found it surprising that despite his political troubles, Crowell had still chosen to attend the banquet, then suggested to Regina that they return inside. Regina refused to ignore what she had witnessed and demanded an explanation, as she usually did. Hans attempted to brush off her questions, but she refused to let the matter drop. Realizing her persistence, Hans promised to explain later and urged her to head back into the hall first. When they re-entered, they sensed the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Regina hurried to her mother to find out what had happened. She asked why the guests were glaring at them with disdain, and Owen admitted confusion, but said everything changed when a particular gentleman walked in. That gentleman turned out to be Dominic Sullivan. Upon entering, Dominic began criticizing the Callista family, claiming they lacked proper decorum. He argued that debuting families must greet every guest personally, and mocked Hans and his relatives as uncultured country folk for failing to do so. Dominic's words cut deeply, especially affecting Regina, though Hans felt the sting as well. Regina wanted to confront him immediately, but Hans restrained her. He understood Dominic's strategy and even admitted it was cleverly executed. An ancient custom once required hosts to greet all attendees. That practice had faded decades ago and was no longer observed. Nevertheless, Hans knew the crowd now perceived them as ill-mannered provincials. Dominic was clearly orchestrating the narrative. Dominic's expertise in etiquette and his control over a powerful banking enterprise gave him tremendous influence, as most noble families were indebted to his institution, and few dared oppose him. Hans had anticipated retaliation from Dominic over the Cenovis matter, yet he never expected such a low tactic. Unsure how to respond, Hans hesitated, unwilling to worsen the situation. He could tolerate humiliation himself, but he worried about his mother and Regina. Regret washed over him for bringing them to the banquet without foreseeing this outcome, and he clenched his fists in frustration. Just then, someone called out his name. It was Durin approaching with a bright, enthusiastic expression. As soon as others noticed Durin engaging Hans, the tense mood began to ease. Durin explained he had been searching for Hans after hearing he would attend, and even introduced him to his companions, leaving Hans astonished by their warm reception. Shift spread quickly through the hall, and the girls from earlier returned to Regina to resume their friendly chatter. They were eager to continue their interrupted discussion, and Regina welcomed them gladly. Meanwhile, Durin guided Hans to a quieter corner for a more private conversation. Durin apologized if he had addressed Hans too casually. He explained he intervened because he saw how dire the situation had become, and mentioned that Dominic had engineered similar incidents before, while Hans sincerely thanked him for preventing further disgrace. Hans admitted he was surprised by the authority Durin commanded among the nobles. Durin credited his standing to his father's once sterling reputation, though those days had faded since his father became known primarily for gambling. He also expressed gratitude to Hans for helping his family earlier, saying he would not have been present at the banquet otherwise. Hans realized he had assisted the Cenovis family without knowing of their former prestige. Later, on their journey home, Hans reflected on the day's events and recognized how badly he had miscalculated. His meeting with the Emperor might easily have turned disastrous, all because he acted impulsively. He concluded that wealth and magical strength alone were insufficient to shape the future, and that knowledge and information were what he truly required. Once home, Hans partially disclosed the truth to his mother and Regina, admitting he was a mage whose abilities even exceeded those of the archmage. Still, he withheld the rest of the truth. It was not a matter of distrust toward his family. Rather, he lacked the strength to manage the consequences, especially if news of a dragon's lair surfaced, which could ignite chaos beyond his control. His mother was stunned, having sensed he kept secrets, but never imagining he possessed magical talent, while Regina remained unsettled since she had witnessed his power firsthand. Hans asked Regina to keep his abilities confidential, and she agreed. Regina then questioned whether Asura and Laisha were aware of his secret. He confirmed that they were, which only fueled her irritation. She could not understand why he trusted his friends before his own family, unaware that Asura and Laisha were eavesdropping outside. Owen reassured Hans that he could keep secrets if necessary, but urged him to prioritize his safety above all else. Hans promised he would never cause her worry, and thanked them both for placing their trust in him. After finishing the conversation with his family, Hans reflected that his purpose in this world was neither dominance nor revenge. Instead, he sought to create meaningful change for the better. With that resolve, he headed toward the barn, contemplating his next move. He stepped inside and shut the door firmly behind him. He teleported to the lyre to continue his usual training routine. Asura and Laisha watch Hans head into the barn, both left wondering what he could possibly be doing in there. Laisha chooses not to press the issue, aware that Hans is still unwilling to reveal every secret he carries. Before long, Asura and Laisha fall into yet another petty argument. As their bickering continues, Regina quietly reflects on everything that happened earlier. Her cheeks flush crimson as she struggles to push thoughts of Crowell out of her mind. In another corner of the city, two individuals named Jeprian and Annabelle can be found inside the Information Guild. With no clients to entertain, Jeprian idly shuffles a deck of cards to pass the time. Annabelle snaps at him, demanding that he find something productive to do. Jeprian calmly reminds her that, as an information guild, it is their customers who should be seeking them out. Unfortunately, ever since a damaging rumor circulated, the nobles have distanced themselves from the guild. Convinced their reputation is beyond repair, Jeprian suggests shutting the guild down for good. Just as despair sets in, a knock echoes at the door. Jeprian rushes to answer it, and finds Hans and Laisha standing outside looking rather uncertain. Claiming he misplaced his bird, Hans is asked by Jeprian what color it is. Hans replies without hesitation that the bird is blue. Jeprian ushers them inside and up the stairs, while Hans reflects that information is the one asset he lacks, a truth made clear after the banquet incident. His memories from his previous life only cover Callista and major imperial events, leaving him ignorant of the capital, which is why he accepted Leisha's suggestion to visit this guild. Upstairs, they are introduced to the guildmaster, Annabelle. Hans prepares to state his name. Annabelle interrupts him, revealing she already knows who he is and recounting his recent actions in detail, astonishing him. Still, such knowledge is to be expected from someone who runs an information network. However, she admits she has no data regarding Leisha. Her gaze then shifts to the feline trailing behind Hans. The cat is none other than Asura, who chose to accompany them in that form. Annabelle scoops Asura up and begins stroking his fur affectionately. Asura had insisted on coming while staying disguised as a cat, so he endures the petting silently to honor his promise to behave. Hans knows Annabelle's background as a talented leader who founded the guild young, and he is relieved she lacks information on Leisha and Asura. The guild once thrived among the best, until it meddled with a dangerous individual's affairs and suffered severe consequences. After nearly collapsing, nobles avoided them out of fear of provoking that same person. A powerful figure is Lord Angus, who continues to isolate the guild. Annabelle is intrigued that Hans is aware of her guild's troubled history. She admits she may have misjudged him. Finally growing serious, she ties back her hair and sits across from Hans to discuss business. She asks him directly what sort of intelligence he seeks. Hans confesses his ignorance about the capital's inner workings due to living in Callista his entire life and proposes an exclusive partnership. He requests detailed intelligence on leading nobles and merchants, as well as notable incidents and trends, offering payment per report and full financial support for the Lucen Guild in return. Annabelle carefully reviews the contract to grasp its terms. Given their damaged standing, she accepts the offer despite guilds usually avoiding weak rural families, as survival leaves her little choice. To demonstrate her worth, she volunteers information about the Empire's 3 dominant families. Hans is startled since he only knows of the McCarthy and Townsend houses. Annabelle agrees they are highly influential and effectively control the Emperor. Yet she reveals a third major power, the Crosser family. This ancient 4-century-old house remains mysterious, with its current head Marcus Chivon Crosser secluded for over 10 years, and his age debated widely. Interestingly, both dominant houses seek Crosser's support, but Marquis Chai Crosser has declared neutrality. Even with memories from another life, Hans has never heard of them, and Leisha appears equally unaware. Hans assumes their obscurity stems from avoiding major conflict and power struggles. Satisfied with the insight, Hans pays Annabelle and asks her to dig deeper into the Crossers. Overjoyed by the payment, Annabelle squeals about finally affording meat until Jeprian urges her to maintain dignity. After leaving, Leisha questions Hans about his interest in the Crosser family. Hans explains that if the 2 dukes are watching them, he wants clarity as well, though Leisha worries about potential risks. The 3 return home. Allman greets them anxiously and informs Hans that an unexpected visitor awaits him. Inside, Hans discovers Archmage Ivan sitting there. Sweat forms on Hans' brow as he fears impending trouble. He recalls casting magic before Ivan and worries his secret may be exposed. Instead, Ivan shocks him with an unforeseen request. Ivan earnestly asks Hans to accept him as a disciple. The request leaves Hans speechless. Gradually, Hans realizes Ivan genuinely wants him as a mentor. Ivan even insists Hans drop formalities and use his given name, which astonishes Hans since they barely know each other. Declaring himself a student already, Ivan claims a teacher may speak freely, while Hans protests that Ivan is older. He also points out Ivan's archmage status, arguing that proper decorum makes such a reversal inappropriate. Ivan counters that conventional etiquette has no authority in the realm of magic. In magic, he argues, only ability determines rank, not age, title, or wealth. Reaching the pinnacle is every mage's ambition, and that is why Ivan seeks Hans' guidance. Overwhelmed, Hans insists his abilities are inferior. Ivan refuses to believe it after witnessing Hans cast a silent 6th circle mirage. Hans downplays it as merely 3rd circle visibility magic. Ivan recalls hearing him say mirage, but Hans stubbornly claims he was misheard and incapable of higher spells. Ivan questions whether the Emperor also misheard him, bringing up the ruler. Leisha suddenly rushes in, as Hans had never mentioned meeting the Emperor. Ivan bristles at the interruption by a supposed guard knight. Hans quickly intervenes. He explains Leisha is more than a guard and asks Ivan to allow him to stay despite the impropriety. Reluctantly, Ivan agrees. Once brief, Leisha remains unexpectedly composed. Rather than anger over the Emperor incident, Leisha shows curiosity about the Emperor's condition. Hans is further surprised that Ivan fails to recognize Leisha. Considering Hans cast a 4th circle illusion on Leisha, he expected Ivan to sense it as a 5th circle mage, yet Ivan notices nothing. Ivan vaguely wonders if he has seen Leisha before, but Hans dismisses it as unfamiliarity with mages. Leisha directly asks Ivan if he truly desires to study under Hans, and Ivan confirms it. Leisha then voices his opinion. He tells Hans accepting would indirectly aid the Emperor and potentially earn imperial favor in the future. Hans immediately realizes Leisha's motives involve leveraging imperial connections. With little alternative, Hans relents. He agrees to guide Ivan. However, he clarifies it will be advisory rather than formal mentorship and requests his identity remain secret, which Ivan accepts while asking for additional terms. Hans adds that Ivan must stop using honorifics, and Ivan complies. Still, Hans fears he cannot indefinitely conceal his strength from such a skilled maid. At the same time, he understands Leisha's reasoning, seeing this alliance as valuable networking. As Ivan prepares to depart, he encounters Regina, who greets him politely. Suddenly, Ivan remembers he carries something from the Emperor. It is a letter intended specifically for Regina. The revelation leaves both siblings stunned. Ivan admits he originally came to deliver the letter, but became distracted. Unsure how to proceed, Regina asks Hans if he should handle the letter. Hans declines, reminding her it was personally written for her by the Emperor. He encourages her to read it herself and compose the reply independently. Regina accepts the letter and retreats to her room to discover its contents. After Ivan made his way back to the castle, he immediately informed the Emperor that he had decided to study under Hans. Only after sharing this news did he remember to hand over Regina's reply letter to the Emperor. The Emperor recalled how Ivan had insisted on personally delivering the letter to Regina instead of assigning a servant. It became clear to the young monarch that Ivan had his own agenda for wanting to meet Hans. In his original letter, the Emperor explained to Regina that he had to leave the banquet abruptly and could not bid her farewell properly, admitting he attended intentionally after hearing rumors about the Callistas and wishing to see them firsthand. He was curious about the individual bold enough to establish a bank for commoners, and confessed that he had been so focused on Hans that he failed to notice how perceptive and principled Regina was. The Emperor openly admitted that he had enjoyed their brief exchange. For that reason, he proposed that they become friends and correspond through letters. Regina felt completely flustered as she read his words. She hurried to Ivan, asking him to wait while she prepared a response. Ivan reassured her that she could take all the time she needed, since he intended to speak further with Hans. In her reply, Regina first apologized for her brother's attack. She also confessed that she had cherished their shared moment. Regina added that she would gladly exchange letters and thoughts, as he suggested. Upon reading her answer, the Emperor was deeply moved. Regina had no reservations, believing that one day he would marry a foreign noble princess chosen for political reasons. Likewise, the Emperor seemed prepared to continue living as a political puppet. Even so, he eagerly anticipated writing to Regina. Before long, they began regularly exchanging letters. Hans soon became aware of this development. Though he had never been particularly romantic in his previous life, he could clearly sense a budding connection between Regina and the Emperor. He debated whether to intervene and searched his memories for insight into the Emperor's character, but found nothing useful. The only thing he recalled was that the Emperor eventually married a foreign princess selected by the two ruling ducal houses. Ultimately, Hans chose not to interfere, decided to let events unfold naturally. Shortly afterward, Callista Bank became the talk of the capital. Commoners flocked to open accounts in overwhelming numbers until it seemed nearly everyone had joined. Claude reported remarkable growth and suggested ending the promotional lottery soon, noting they were approaching Sullivan Bank's scale as people from nearby regions traveled to register. Hans was surprised that demand extended beyond the city and considered expanding with new branches, but Claude cautioned that expansion might be problematic. He quickly apologized for overstepping, yet Hans encouraged him to speak openly. Claude explained that while they had many customers, most were commoners with small deposits. He added that deposits and loans were nearly balanced, warning that new branches could strain their reserves, and smiled upon hearing this reasoning. When Claude asked why, Hans admitted he was impressed by his financial insight. Seeking a solution, Hans suggested it was time to revisit the earlier business concept. Claude hesitated, reminding him the idea remained theoretical and had been abandoned due to serious implementation flaws. Hans reassured him that he would introduce supporting measures to address those weaknesses. Soon after, Callista Bank officially introduced checks. At Huffman Trading Company, a man presented a check to his client as he prepared to settle a payment of 30 gold coins. The merchant was bewildered by the slip of paper until the trader explained it was a Callista Bank check redeemable for 30 gold. Though the merchant doubted its value, the trader clarified he had already deposited the full amount. To avoid carrying heavy coins, he left the funds in the bank for collection. Skeptical, the merchant insisted on traditional cash. Since the trader carried no coins, he escorted the merchant to the bank to withdraw the money together. A clerk carefully examined the document to verify its authenticity. The merchant then received his 30 gold coins. He stood there astonished. Transporting gold is cumbersome and risky, forcing trading firms to hire costly mercenary escorts. Yet robberies still occur. Checks eliminated that burden by enabling large sums to be transferred effortlessly, an innovation credited to Claw. He believed this system would soon dominate the kingdom. Eventually, Sullivan learned that Huffman Trading Company had partnered with Callista Bank. Curious, he recalled helping Huffman rise into the top 10 trading firms. His assistant noted that customers visited Callista to redeem checks and often conducted additional business there. Soon, even doubtful nobles began using Callista Bank. Sullivan was incredulous that a commoner's bank gained power through mere paper. He obtained one of the checks for inspection, observing its serial number, signature, amount, and durable silk-infused fiber. He concluded the design itself was not extraordinary. He immediately ordered his bank to issue similar checks, dismissing ethical concerns and confident merchants would return out of habit. Growing angrier, he insisted that, as the empire's banking pioneer, there was nothing innovative about writing numbers on paper. His assistant, fearing his temper, promised to comply. Sullivan also anticipated Callista's expansion and instructed his aide to plant spies among new branch employees. The assistant assured him it would be handled. Sullivan could hardly believe the stress required to maintain his dominance. Meanwhile, he had taken interest in a noble named Bowen. Around the same time, Annabelle delivered Hans' requested report, in which he singled out Bowen's name. He asked Annabelle for a thorough explanation about him. She was visibly surprised by his focus. She began to suspect Hans was far from ordinary, having reviewed hundreds of pages instantly and prioritized them. Hans demonstrated remarkable analytical skill. Annabelle found it hard to believe he was only 18. He explained that Viscount Bowen collected women's clothing purely as a hobby, not from vice or disguise. He even traveled across the empire to acquire garments, amassing an impressive wardrobe. For 3 years, he had attempted to open a salon, yet Sullivan Bank consistently denied his loan applications. Hans asked why Sullivan refused him. Annabelle replied that salon work was deemed beneath noble status. Hans summoned Poitier and handed over Bowen's report. He directed where to file it, revealing it belonged in the investment priority category and further astonishing Annabelle. Hans realized that just as commoners are constrained by status, nobles too are confined within rigid social expectations. Later, Ullman updated Hans on the territory's prosperity, crediting his knowledge for increased immigration and record harvest yields. Hans decided he could temporarily set aside concerns about the land. Soon afterward, Sullivan Bank released its own checks. Many customers shifted back to Sullivan due to familiarity. Others disliked traveling to the capital to redeem Callista checks. Poitier informed Damien of the declining market share caused by Sullivan's move. Hans calmly stated there was no cause for alarm, explained that imitators are inevitable, and their primary goal of expanding clientele had already been achieved. Moreover, Callista's checks incorporated proprietary technology that set them apart. Long after, Bowen arrived at the bank seeking a meeting with Hans. He entered flamboyantly, presenting a bouquet as he greeted Hans. Hans was momentarily stunned by the gesture. Initially, the report had led him to suspect eccentricity of a darker sort. In person, Bowen simply appeared passionate about fashion. Bowen admitted he was shocked to receive an investment proposal rather than a loan and feared it might be fraudulent. Hans assured him sincerely that the offer was genuine. He informs Bowen that he will manage the salon personally and will not be required to repay the invested capital. Instead, the bank will take an agreed percentage of the salon's future profits. Bowen bursts into tears at the offer, expressing gratitude and admitting that others labeled him a deranged pervert because of his collection, dismissing his salon dream as nonsense. He never expected Hans to place trust in him, and then notices Poitier pouring water into the flower vase nearby. Bowen quickly tells him that watering them is unnecessary. He explains the blooms are artificial, crafted to never wilt because he dislikes seeing flowers fade, so he commissioned an artisan to preserve their lifelike freshness. Hans is astonished to learn the stunning arrangement before him is entirely artificial and remarks that it surpasses any imitation flowers he has previously encountered. Bowen adds that producing them is costly, with each single flower priced at 2 silver coins. During this, Poitier quietly advises Hans to reconsider investing, arguing that Bowen seems reckless with money since few would spend 2 silver coins on a mere flower. Hans dismisses the concern, confident in what the future holds. He knows that premium artificial flowers will eventually become fashionable among noblewomen for adorning hats and dresses, and though expensive, demand will outstrip supply and even overshadow jewelry. In fact, this very trend once contributed to Callista's financial downfall in his previous life. Though the craze is still years away, Hans believes early investment will yield immense returns. He firmly confirms his decision to fund Bowen's venture. Later, Hans presents the artificial flowers to Regina, leaving her amazed. She marvels at their scent, questioning whether they are truly man-made. Meanwhile, Asura grumbles to Leisha about feeling neglected because Hans has been constantly occupied. Hans rarely shares meals with them anymore, and suddenly both sense a surge of magical energy radiating from the shed. Asura remarks that such power spills out from there every evening. Curiosity drives them to investigate. Hans exits the shed and encounters the pair. They are already waiting for him outside. Asura demands an explanation for Hans' nightly secrecy, suspecting hidden matters, while Leisha cautiously asks if it involves danger. Hans struggles to respond directly. Leisha senses his hesitation and chooses not to press further, believing Hans will speak when ready, but Asura refuses to let it go. Reminds Hans that honesty was their agreement, making Hans realize the situation is escalating. Determined to take control, he acts first. He says he was about to call them in anyway. Leading them inside, he reveals a massive golden magic circle and explains he has been perfecting it in secret, admitting he should have reinforced the barrier to contain its power. Leisha and Asura are stunned by the overwhelming energy emanating from the formation. When asked, Hans reveals it is a warp gate, shocking Leisha since such magic belongs to the 7th circle. Even in ancient times, only a handful of mages ever succeeded in creating warp gates. This revelation makes Leisha question Hans' true identity. Hans finally admits he is the successor of the Golden Dragon Seyfried. Confession leaves both companions speechless. He acknowledges they had long suspected something, but refrained from probing out of gratitude for their shared past. Though he could continue concealing the truth, he feels they deserve honesty, yet he still withholds the secret of regression. Leisha now understands why Hans guarded his identity so carefully. Hans explains he must travel frequently via the gate and does not wish them to worry when he vanishes. He invites them to step into the circle together. Instantly they arrive at Callista Castle, leaving Leisha and Asura stunned, while Hans struggles slightly to stabilize the 7th circle coordinates. Leisha recognizes the restricted storage room and realizes Hans planned everything meticulously, asking if the gate connects only these 2 locations. Hans clarifies that warp gates operate solely between fixed points. He feels relieved to return to his territory after months away. Approaching the window, he pauses. Outside, he witnesses a catastrophic scene. Rushing out, he sees the land engulfed in floodwaters. Butler William is stunned by Hans' sudden appearance since he was thought to be in the capital. Hans brushes aside explanations about himself and demands to know what happened. William reports that severe flooding has struck the territory. Continuous rain for over a week caused the river to overflow at dawn. Officials have been evacuating residents from lowlands, and unaware of the gate, William assumes Hans traveled by road while Hans silently processes the crisis. Hans recalls that although prolonged rain was common annually, the river had never overflowed before. He searches his memories, certain he would remember such devastation. William adds that the western plains have suffered immense damage. Hans connects the dots, recalling that despite vast territory, House Callista lacked wealth due to barren eastern mountains and useless western marshlands. Those marshes once absorbed seasonal rains, but were largely uninhabitable and infertile. Over 3 years, Hans spearheaded reclamation and development projects, drained marshes, added sand to enrich soil, and turned wasteland into productive farmland. Fertile land attracted migrants seeking opportunity. This explained previous reports of prosperity. Record harvests followed, and Hans believed the territory secure until now. He learns the overflow inundated reclaimed farmland rather than homes. Most residents escape, though knights continue checking for stragglers. Hans blames himself, noting the marshes once absorbed excess rainwater. Their reclamation eliminated that natural buffer. Sa argues natural disasters are not Hans' fault, and Leisha adds that 3 years have passed without issue. Hans disagrees, fearing his attempts to reshape fate have triggered unintended consequences. Wonders if altering destiny has created irreversible harm. Lost in thought, he is jolted by Leisha shouting at him. Leisha reminds him that as Lord he must act decisively, instead of wallowing in guilt. Forceful shake brings Hans back to clarity. He questions William about the servants' actions. William explains they were ordered to move supplies from underground storage. Hans immediately redirects efforts toward evacuating all citizens and instructs Leisha to assist the Night Order in relief. Accepting Leisha's point, Hans resolves to prioritize saving Callista. Reports soon confirm no casualties so far. Hans orders evacuation near the embankment due to unstable soil. Suddenly, a knight gallops toward them urgently. He reports that the downstream bridge has collapsed. At the site, they see the bridge destroyed, leaving 20 households stranded beyond it, and details remain unclear since it was already ruined when discovered. A woman appears on the opposite bank. She pleads for help, explaining a critically ill patient cannot cross the river. Hans asks about an upstream detour, but is told it too is flooded and perilous. Hans dismounts his horse. He lifts a stone and casts a flight spell upon it. Watching it rise, he confirms levitation is wind-sensitive, and that deception alone will not suffice. Hans quietly instructs Leisha to keep the knight silent about his next move. Leisha, though curious, pledges his support without hesitation. Hans strides toward the shattered bridge. His people warn him to be cautious, but as Seyfried's successor, he refuses to stand idle. He invokes a powerful kinesis spell. Display leaves onlookers in awe. Broken stones begin shifting back into position, though his work continues. He layers multiple castings, further bewildering the crowd. Golden light radiates from his body as he concentrates. He completes the reconstruction with a 6th circle hardening spell. He finishes, the shattered bridge stands fully restored. Leisha stares in disbelief at the sight before him. Hans instructs Leisha and the knights to resume evacuation since the bridge is secure, and Leisha acknowledges, yes. Hans knows everyone who witnessed the spell will harbor doubts, and though he considers his move rash, Leisha steps forward to take control. He shouts at the knights to ignore what they saw and prioritize saving lives, ordering them to regroup later for an announcement. With the bridge repaired, rescue efforts proceed far more smoothly. Grateful villagers express heartfelt thanks to Hans for aiding them. Hans notices more injured than anticipated and feels relieved that swift action prevented greater tragedy. Servant approaches, questioning how Hans arrived so quickly despite news of the collapse, leaving him momentarily speechless. Fortunately, the rescued woman intervenes, claiming the bridge never fully fell, and others back her story to strengthen the lie. Though the servant insists he saw it crumble, the crowd dismisses him, pointing out the bridge now stands intact. An elderly villager steps forward to thank Hans personally. As most residents were outsiders, they feared abandonment in disaster. Hans feels a quiet pride upon hearing their gratitude. After emergency operations conclude, Leisha gathers the knights and the witness together, announces that before they disperse, they must address the obvious truth that their lord wields magic. He knows countless questions linger in their minds. Leisha asks them to imagine themselves as ambitious nobles. Explains Hans gained his title at 15 and commands formidable magic, yet lacks political protection beyond that power. If rival nobles discovered this, they would attempt to exploit him. The knights finally grasp the danger and understand why secrecy is vital. With resounding voices, they swear obedience. Leisha apologizes to the woman for involving her. He reassures him she holds no resentment. Though ignorant of magical theory, she recognizes Hans' extraordinary strength and appreciates his risk. She promises to keep his secret without hesitation. Relieved, Leisha feels reassured by their loyalty. He then heads toward Hans' office, finding him immersed in work once again. Hans studies data from the Western Reclamation Project, still blaming himself for the flood. Reviewing the map, he notes the western lands lie lower than the east, causing mountain runoff to gather into marshes during heavy rain. He regrets altering nature and contemplates constructing an upstream dam, planning to consult engineers at dawn. Leisha senses the weight on Hans' shoulders. He advises him not to shoulder everything alone and to rely on trusted allies. Hans appreciates the counsel, yet reminds Leisha that he will depart in 2 years. Leisha recalls Hans once promising his name would be cleared in 5 years. That hope is why he has remained in Callista. Hans admits feeling guilty for burdening him with command duties while he hides. Leisha has quietly awaited vindication. As recompense, Hans presents him with a finely crafted sword. He explains he meant to gift it earlier after revealing his strength, but circumstances delayed it. Leisha thanks him, but remarks that a guard knight typically carries simple arms. Hans then reveals the blade is forged from dragon bone. Leisha is left speechless. Hans explains it is oliphant alloy, dragon bone fused with mithril, capable of enduring a swordmaster's aura and refinable only by dragons. He obtained the material from a dragon's lair and deems Leisha worthy of it. Leisha grabs him, scolding him for gifting such priceless dragon armament so casually. Hans assures him he understands the gravity. Leisha then questions whether Asa can also be trusted. Hans replies that cat people seldom remain among humans and assumes Asa may someday return home. During this, Leisha gains insight into Han's mindset. Han seems convinced his companions will eventually leave him. Even so, he entrusts them with rare treasures and secrets. Suddenly, a servant rushes in. She reports that a stranger has arrived and is confronting Asa. Hans and Leisha hurry to the scene. They find Asa facing an unfamiliar man. It becomes clear Asa recognizes him. The stranger introduces himself as Ryuji. Asa warns Hans and Leisha not to interfere. Unexpectedly, Ryuji kneels before Asa. He addresses him respectfully as his lord. Hans and Leisha are utterly bewildered. Inside the castle, Hans apologizes for any discourtesy shown to Asa's guest. Ryuji reveals he is a warrior of the cat people and thanks Hans for sheltering Asa. However, he insists Asa cannot remain among humans and intends to escort him home. Hans remains composed, having anticipated such a moment. Asa immediately refuses. He declares he will not return. Ryuji warns him of human dangers, but Asa stands firm. Asa confesses he fears someone back home and does not wish to face them. Hans understands Ryuji's concern, assures him Asa is dear to him and may stay in the territory for as long as he desires. Asa hides behind Hans, praising him as trustworthy. Ryuji argues their people worry, yet Asa claims they never truly care. Leisha wonders what rank Asa holds among his kind. Realizing persuasion is futile, Ryuji decides to remain in the territory as well. Hans is surprised by this decision. Still, he accepts it since Ryuji accompanies Asa. Thus, Ryuji becomes part of their unusual circle. By midday, the waters begin to recede. Hans remains troubled about explaining his sudden appearance and magical feat. Leisha arrives, asking if he will return to the capital, and Hans confirms. He worries about unresolved explanations. A servant quietly exits the room. Hans realizes Leisha has already handled the situation. They return to the capital via the warp gate. Ryuji is astonished by the experience, though Hans' concerns persist. His sister confronts him anxiously upon arrival. He had even alerted guards about his disappearance, while he intended only a brief test of the gate. The unexpected flood prevented him from staying silent. He explains to his sister and mother that a flood struck their lands. He tells them he traveled there to confirm the situation. Thankfully, he assures them there were no casualties. Once he finishes his explanation, Regina immediately starts interrogating him like she always does. She tries to understand how he managed to visit Callista and return within a single day. Fortunately, Hans' mother steps in once more and tells Regina to stop pressuring him, assuring her that he will share his secret when he feels ready. Regina throws in a sarcastic remark, telling Hans to send her greetings to the servants when he heads back to their land. Meanwhile, Asa grows concerned about Ryuji and asks if he is really fine wandering around like that. But Ryuji reassures him that he is okay, since he has been searching for Asa for a long time. At that moment, Leisha arrives, tells Asa that he needs a moment of his time. Asa invites him to speak freely, yet Leisha insists they talk somewhere private. Wanting to give them space, Ryuji excuses himself. Rather than using the door, Ryuji casually jumps out through the window like a nimble cat. Lightyear is left speechless by the sight until Asa snaps him back to attention and asks what he wants to discuss. Leisha admits that he has been deliberately avoiding involvement in Asa's affairs. Still, he needs to know whether Asa committed a crime and is currently fleeing because of it. He worries that such a situation could endanger Hans, which is something he refuses to allow. Lekia directly asks if Asa's stay in the house threatens Hans in any way. Asa answers that he is not a criminal, though he is dealing with deeply personal matters. Leisha falls silent for a while, expecting Asa to elaborate on his troubles. He recalls Hans mentioning that Asa might eventually return to his former residence. Realizing Asa will not open up further, Leisha states he will no longer pry into his issues and prepares to leave. Before he can go, Asa questions him about the new sword he carries. Leisha explains that Hans was the one who gifted it to him, and he plans to give it back, believing the weapon surpasses his current abilities. As soon as those words leave his mouth, Hans' attention locks entirely onto the sword. Basa suggests that he would rather claim the sword himself. Leisha objects, saying that is impossible. Asa is puzzled since Leisha clearly admires it, and Leisha reveals it is a dragon armament not yet revealed to the world. Asa points out that since Leisha intends to return it, he may have a valid claim to take it instead. He reminds him that ownership ultimately depends on Hans' decision. Leisha recognizes the logic and, knowing Hans' personality, suspects Hans would hand it to Asa the moment it is returned. For that reason, Leisha declares he will keep the sword rather than return it. Their discussion escalates into a heated argument, loud enough for those outside to hear. Sometime later, Regina and Hans travel to the Imperial Castle after receiving a formal invitation from Emperor Crowell. It appears that following the flood incident, Leisha informed Hans that he wanted to dedicate himself to training with his newly acquired sword. Asa is equally occupied, having many matters to discuss with Ryuji. Seeing this as a chance, Hans thinks about returning to the dragon lair to resume his magical studies. While considering it, Regina bursts into the room to announce a letter she just received from His Majesty. Breathless with excitement, she tells Hans that Crowell has invited them to dinner the following evening. Because of that, the siblings dress elegantly and make their way to the Imperial Palace. Crowell greets them warmly and admits their previous meeting was rather brief. As they sit down, he shares that he has been eager to see them again. Hans is surprised to find that only he and Regina are invited. Ivan, the Emperor's closest confidant, is also there. Hans finds it unusual that the Emperor arranged such a private dinner, since in his past life Crowell struggled socially. Hans also notices that Crowell's demeanor seems different from their first encounter. Soon after, exquisite dishes are presented before them, leaving Regina utterly amazed. The Emperor worries something is amiss with the meal, but Regina quickly assures him everything is perfect. Hans samples the soup and praises its rich flavor. Though slightly salty, it tastes wonderful. Crowell explains it is made with clams and shrimp, one of his personal favorites, and he is pleased they enjoy it. Ivan adds that it is rarely served, signaling the Emperor's special regard for Hans. The Emperor asks if they often eat seafood. Regina admits they rarely have the opportunity, and Hans explains that landlocked Callista makes such ingredients scarce. Crowell replies that the capital faces the same issue, as seafood spoils easily in transit and becomes costly, and sometimes it is unavailable altogether. Remarks that such dishes are usually reserved for nobles, though he wishes commoners could enjoy them too. Hearing this, Hans feels certain that Crowell differs from the typical aristocrat. As the dinner progresses, additional courses are served. Regina and Hans express gratitude for the rare culinary experience. Hans senses the gathering nearing its conclusion and wonders about its true purpose. Suddenly, Crowell turns toward Hans, sighed, and asks if he would like to continue chatting, and Hans eagerly agrees. However, Crowell clarifies that he was not speaking to Hans, but to Regina instead. Realizing the Emperor's intention, Ivan seizes the moment and draws Hans away. He pulls Hans out, saying there is much they need to discuss. Ivan leads him to the institute dedicated to magical research. Hans is astonished that even in an age where magic is fading, Imperial mages still hold significant status. They are granted freedom to study and experiment as they please. Ivan invites Hans into his personal laboratory, surprising him further. Ivan explains that every mage serving the Imperial court is provided with a private workspace. While talking, a bespectacled researcher bumps into Hans. Hans attempts to respond calmly, but the man snaps at him for standing in the way. Hans is taken aback, though Ivan advises him not to mind it. Ivan explains that mages consider their research the most crucial thing in existence. He then asks Hans for his impression of the institute, emphasizing that rank and wealth mean nothing there. He adds that within its walls, there are no petty noble feuds or political annoyances to worry about. Ivan continues praising the institute as a haven for those devoted entirely to magic, insisting it is the ideal environment for any mage. Hans realizes Ivan's intention and asks if he is trying to recruit him, and Ivan openly confirms it while promising his identity can remain concealed. Hans acknowledges that Ivan brought him there deliberately to persuade him to join. Even so, Hans turns down the proposal. He admits the offer is appealing, since meeting fellow mages would be stimulating. However, a major issue remains, as their magical sources differ. Draconic magic and human magic function in entirely distinct ways. Draconic magic stems from the heart and activates with a command, unlike human magic, which relies on spoken incantations. Knowing he began with draconic magic and lacks knowledge of human methods, Hans believes he would contribute little at the academy. At that moment, his gaze falls upon a magic circle drawn on a board. Evan explains it is a fireburst spell he is refining, an upgraded form that elevates a first circle fireball into a fifth circle attack, though it remains incomplete. He admits focusing on defensive magic for the Emperor has left him weaker in offense. After examining the diagram closely, Hans asks whether he may attempt to adjust it. Creating new magic is a source of immense pride for mages, often considered a once-in-a-lifetime accomplishment proving their mastery. Therefore, they guard such developments carefully and rarely share them with others. Aware of this custom, Hans is surprised Ivan permits his in on the evolving magic circle he has been working on. After studying the formula for several minutes, Hans identifies the flaw and corrects it. Ivan is utterly astonished. He ends up embracing Hans and proclaiming him a genius. Ivan admits he struggled with the formula for months without success, while Hans resolved it in minutes. Hans modestly says he only adjusted an existing structure. Ivan insists Hans is extraordinary for mastering ancient runic language. Hans is startled by the mention of runes. Ivan explains that magic formulas are written in ancient runes, and understanding their mechanics at a glance makes Hans a true runic prodigy. Hans finally understands how he could comprehend human magic formulas despite seeing them for the first time. Ancient runes are essentially draconic magic, translated into written symbols. Human magic is reconstructed from these foundations, meaning draconic magic forms its core. Hans realizes he can study both systems, since they share the same underlying principles. This revelation leaves him deeply astonished. Nevertheless, he returns to reality and apologizes to Ivan for altering his formula. Ivan, however, feels no anger, as he already regards Hans as his teacher despite the rejection. Ivan even tells Hans he can forget about formal etiquette, insisting that being allowed to learn from him is the greatest privilege he could ever receive. Hans is struck by how free of arrogance Ivan is compared to most other mages. For Ivan, the pursuit of magical knowledge is all that truly matters. At that moment, Ivan's students step into the chamber. They are stunned when they notice that the magic circle displayed on the board has been fully completed. Ivan feels conflicted because he was not the one who finalized the formula. Ivan proceeds to present Hans to his disciples. He explains that Hans is visiting the emperor and that he is merely showing him around the institute. The man who previously bumped into Hans turns out to be one of those disciples. He openly questions why their master would allow an unknown outsider into his private lab. Another disciple attempts to calm him down, suggesting they focus on celebrating the completed magic circle instead. That suggestion only angers him further, and he proposes driving the outsider out, furious that a non-mage has seen their treasured work. Complaints begin to irritate Ivan, yet Ivan remains silent to safeguard Hans' hidden identity. Ivan reminds them that he personally invited Hans, so courtesy is expected. He adds that Hans is the emperor's guest, deserving respect, though he cannot reveal that Hans is actually a powerful mage. The ill-mannered disciple then points out that Ivan is usually the one preaching that ranks and formalities do not matter. Before the tension worsens, Hans suggests to Ivan that they leave. Once outside, Ivan apologizes for his students' behavior, admitting he has indulged them too much. Hans reassures him he is not upset and understands Ivan was protecting his identity. He also appreciates how close Ivan is to his pupils. Ivan admits they are talented but lacking in decorum, and he is certain they would have collapsed in shock if they witnessed Hans' abilities. From what he observed, Hans recognizes that the three disciples are gifted and given Ivan's status as an archmage. He would only accept exceptional students. Hans believes the trio could one day rise to become archmages of the empire. He briefly thinks it would be helpful to enlist their support for his own plans. The two then head back to the waiting area to see Crowell and Regina enjoying each other's company. They appear relaxed and cheerful as they converse. The sight leaves Hans astonished. He wonders when Regina and the emperor became so close, knowing they exchanged letters but not realizing their bond had deepened. Ivan glances at Hans and laughs, realizing Hans is surprisingly clueless about romance. After spending a pleasant time together, Hans and Regina board their carriage and depart for home. During the ride, Regina suddenly asks whether men prefer quiet and elegant women. As soon as Hans hears the question, he understands he is about to be dragged into giving romantic advice. Lacking any experience, he begins to fumble over his words. He eventually asks if she fears the emperor might dislike her. Regina struggles to respond. From her hesitation, Hans realizes she has fallen in love with Crowell. Regina admits her feelings, but clarifies she has no ambition of becoming empress. She simply enjoys meeting and conversing with him. Understanding her feelings, Hans assures her he will support her decision no matter what. He encourages her to follow her heart without worrying about public opinion. Ivan had previously advised Hans to give Regina freedom, warning that trying to restrain her would only cause inner resentment. Not long after, reports of forged checks begin surfacing at Sullivan Bank. The head of Huffman Trading Company is stunned when attempting to cash his check. He is informed that the amount has already been withdrawn. Assuming it must be a mistake, he argues since the check is worth at least 50 gold coins. The dispute escalates, drawing attention from other customers inside the bank. Ironically, he had been the first to transfer from Callista Bank to Sullivan Bank when check services were introduced. Dominic Sullivan soon learns of the growing counterfeit crisis. He becomes deeply anxious as his assistant reports the issue spreading across all branches. The assistant explains the fake checks are nearly indistinguishable from real ones, so convincing that even staff cannot tell them apart. As a result, they cannot estimate how many counterfeits are circulating. Sullivan orders all checks to be recalled within 2 weeks and restricts withdrawals to the issuing branch by the original signer, after which all check withdrawals will cease. His assistant protests that 2 weeks is far too short, predicting it may take months for customers to comply. Sullivan dismisses concerns for commoners, instructing him to notify only major clients. At that moment, Another aide rushes in to report that customers are overwhelming the main branch with withdrawal requests, having lost faith in the bank's reliability. Sullivan first thinks it aligns with his recall plan, but soon realizes the deeper issue is shattered trust, as nobles and large companies are withdrawing massive deposits. If this continues, it will trigger a bank run, where withdrawals surge rapidly within a short time. Faced with this reality, Sullivan feels utterly defeated and asks how Callista Bank is managing its counterfeit problem. He is told that Callista handles it effectively, catching forgers as soon as they present fake checks. The secret lies in a specialized device used to verify authenticity. Hans demonstrates the device to Annabelle, explaining that when checks were introduced, they installed the tool at every service counter. Staff were trained to release funds only after the check passed inspection. The device detects fakes regardless of how skillfully they are forged. Ebel realizes Hans anticipated counterfeiting from the outset, and Hans confirms he did. He explains that no matter how secure a design appears, determined criminals will search for weaknesses. That foresight led him to prepare countermeasures in advance. Annabelle informs him that information about the counterfeit detector has become the most sought-after commodity in intelligence circles. From official guilds to underground networks, everyone seeks details, especially Sullivan Bank, yet no one understands how it functions. Hans is unsurprised, since the device resembles an ordinary lamp. In reality, it is a magical apparatus powered by embedded magic stones. He inscribed magic attuned to specific wavelengths onto each check, and engineered the detector so even non-mages can operate it. He once thought such precautions were excessive, but now he is grateful he prepared them. Hans jokes that even if Annabelle sold the secrets, no one could reproduce the device due to proprietary technology, though his remark lightly wounds her. Annabelle firmly declares she would never betray Hans or his enterprises, regardless of any fortune offered. She views him as her savior for rescuing her guild from bankruptcy, leading to a surge of new commissions. Hans values the partnership as well, recalling how her guild warned him about potential spies when opening new branches. He is disgusted that Sullivan would stoop so low to sabotage competitors. Annabelle explains Sullivan's confidence stems from support by House McCarthy. House McCarthy stands as one of the Empire's two dominant factions, alongside House Townsend. Hans asks whether she possesses any intelligence regarding Marquis Crosser. Annabelle admits she has none. She says the information is practically non-existent, making it impossible to obtain. Hans anticipates McCarthy will soon notice Callista's rise and interfere, so he considers forming an alliance with the Marcus family, though for now he sets aside what he cannot control. He then inquires about trading companies in Somerville, and Annabelle confirms there are several since it is Jeprian's hometown. When he asks about seafood distributors, she promises to investigate, confident that Somerville's coastal reputation ensures options. Pleased, Hans reveals his intention to launch a seafood restaurant, operated directly from the capital. Annabelle is surprised and points out the high cost and transport challenges of seafood, though she need not worry. Hans assures her he will resolve the logistics problem. He assigns her guild two missions: securing dependable suppliers and researching recipes suited to local tastes. Though astonished, Annabelle accepts the responsibility with a smile. Hans is surprised. She agrees before hearing the full proposal. Explains she has learned that doubting Hans is pointless because he always succeeds in his ventures. Hans smiles at the praise and tells her he will await the formal contract. Due to the turmoil surrounding Sullivan Bank, Callista Bank attracts a surge of new customers. When Hans shared his idea of launching a seafood restaurant with his team, they welcomed it enthusiastically, and Leisha even volunteered to travel to Somerville to learn authentic recipes. Hans feels relieved seeing that everything is progressing smoothly. He decides the time has come to head back to his own territory, and soon tells his mother and sister about his intention to return home, and Regina is visibly taken aback. He explains that the business is running steadily now, and that staying away from their land for too long would not be wise. Their mother supports his reasoning, though she mentions she will miss her new acquaintances, while Regina starts planning a shopping trip before leaving the capital. At that point, Hans reveals he intends to leave both of them in the capital. His mother is startled, but Hans points out that she had been unwell for years and only recently regained her social life in the capital, where she has begun forming friendships. Blushing deeply, his mother agrees with his suggestion. Regina adds that their mother constantly receives invitations to gatherings and has become quite popular socially. Hans then suggests it would benefit Regina to remain as well, especially since she wants to continue her studies. He also hints that staying would make corresponding with her particular pen pal easier, prompting their mother to sense something suspicious. She directly asks Regina whether this pen pal happens to be a man. Their mother proudly remarks that Regina is of marriageable age, and should begin considering potential suitors. Hans cannot reveal that the man is actually the emperor, and Regina in turn worries about Hans living alone in the territory. But he reassures her he will be perfectly comfortable at home. Their mother is unconcerned, confident that Leisha and Asa will accompany Hans. Soon after, Hans and his companions prepare for their journey back to Callista. Asa openly expresses his happiness about returning. He prefers the atmosphere of Callista over the capital. Hans also suspects Leisha will feel relieved, as he had been unable to move freely in the capital out of fear of recognition. To his surprise, Ryuji travels with them, but chooses to sit beside the driver since he dislikes confined spaces. Inside the carriage, Asa and Leisha quickly start bickering, with Asa complaining about traveling by carriage instead of using a warp gate, and Hans reminds him that they cannot use the warp gate because the journey is considered an official trip. Eventually, they reach Callista's estate, and Leisha wakes Hans to alert him that something seems off. When Hans peers outside, he is astonished to see a massive crowd. William appears and explains he came personally to welcome Hans back. William suggests Hans dismount and walk since it would be quicker, prompting Hans to ask about the large gathering at the gate. William reveals they are immigrants hoping to settle, lining up for identification checks, which surprises Hans since he expected fewer arrivals after the flood. William clarifies that the opposite happened, as news spread that Hans compensated flood victims generously. Callista gained a reputation as a safe haven, encouraging entire families to relocate there. Hans is deeply moved by this development. With no other option, he proceeds into Callista on foot. To his amazement, citizens are gathered to greet him warmly. Hans asks William if he arranged the reception, but William explains that word of his return spread naturally. William reassures him that he has crafted a suitable story regarding Hans' presence during a child hands a flower, inhales its scent, and feels a strong sense of belonging. Upon reaching the castle, he finds the staff lined up in welcome. Servants inquire whether he prefers to dine or rest first. Hans instead requests to review administrative records. He resumes his duties immediately, which surprises no one. They are already familiar with his diligent nature. William presents the compiled reports, starting with updates on Compton Mountain. He reports that mining preparations are nearly complete, and operations can begin next month. News that pleases Hans. Hans had quietly arranged the mining project because he anticipated interference. The two powerful ducal families, despite the ore legally belonging to Callista. William then informs him that the blacksmith he sought has been found. Blacksmith Grunberg seems less impressive than expected, and William worries he lacks the promised talent, noting his confusion about Hans' intended role for him. Yet Hans remains confident that Grunberg's true abilities will emerge in time. In a previous life, Grunberg became a famed master smith before leaving Callista, so Hans instructs William to appoint him to oversee both the mine and the new fort. William then reveals the grand blueprint for the planned Magic Academy. Its sheer scale makes William question whether Hans truly intends to proceed. Hans replies that completing it is not optional, as it fulfills a vow made to his mentor. After spending hours reviewing matters, Hans finally wraps up. Leisha wonders why Hans pushes himself on his first day back, and Hans is surprised both Asa and Leisha waited instead of resting. They respond that the carriage ride left them feeling refreshed. Asa eagerly clings to Hans, declaring once again that Callista surpasses the capital. Hans proposes inspecting the territory together the next day, since it has been some time. Asa instantly agrees without hesitation. 2 years pass swiftly as the household's enterprises continue flourishing. In the capital, one of the busiest districts earns the nickname Callista Street. The presence of Callista Bank's headquarters transformed the area, highlighting its remarkable growth over 2 years. Another attraction on the same street also draws crowds. It is the seafood restaurant known as the Sea Breeze. Patrons consistently praise the dishes served there. Notably, the establishment welcomes commoners as well. Though prices are somewhat high, commoners are willing to indulge, especially for celebrating important occasions. In the past, ordinary citizens would never have dreamed of eating seafood in the capital. Seabreeze changed that by ensuring fresh supply, whereas previously fish would spoil before arrival. Rumors suggest a mage casts preservation spells on cargo leaving the port, allowing seafood to remain fresh regardless of travel time. Nobles debate the plausibility, noting that such magic requires at least third circle mastery, leading them to speculate about imperial involvement despite restrictions on court mages. One concludes the restaurant must have ties to the imperial palace, yet the true owner remains unknown, and some nobles resent that both classes dine there. Management deliberately reduced prices so that commoners could afford to eat there, though seating is divided by floors. An exclusive upper level is reserved for the most influential figures. Meanwhile, Jeprian urges Hans to publicly claim ownership, arguing no one would believe a commoner owns such a place. Hans laughs and says he only provided capital and planning. Jeprian crafted and refined the recipes to suit local tastes, Hans insists he deserves recognition as proprietor. Geprion reluctantly accepts and thanks Hans for the gesture. Hans praises the day's dishes, and Geprion admits he enhanced them in honor of a special occasion. The occasion marks Hans' return to full involvement in capital ventures. Having previously focused on territorial affairs, he now intends to expand into new enterprises. Soon, Hans is informed that his guest has arrived earlier than expected. Since he has finished dining, he declines to keep them waiting. He orders that the guest be shown in. Visitor turns out to be Bowen. Bowen presents Hans with a bouquet and kneels to thank him for reserving the exclusive upper floor for their meeting. Seated, Bowen speaks enthusiastically about thriving business. He reveals plans to open a fifth branch in Bensi, surprising Hans. Bowen's fashion empire began with premium artificial flowers and expanded into fabrics and women's apparel. His continued success earned him the nickname Golden Hans. Hans also praises his achievement with the men's salon, which overcame initial skepticism. Bowen modestly says his success comes from his keen eye, prompting Hans to ask for clarification. Bowen explains that he noticed Hans keeps a different wardrobe prepared for every season. He goes on to describe how he would personally style Hans, concluding that he would craft snug, thick sleeves to conceal the gold bracelet on Hans' wrist. Bowen senses the bracelet carries a hidden meaning and should not be displayed openly, realizing from Hans' constant use that it holds deep personal value. He advises Hans to stay cautious, and Hans awkwardly expresses his gratitude. Bowen's intuition is correct, as the bracelet is in fact the dragon's bracelet. Bowen invites Hans to visit his salon whenever possible, promising to refine his image first. He proudly claims he can elevate anyone's appearance except one person, Marquis Crosser, which immediately catches Hans' attention. The last time Hans discussed Crosser with Annabelle, he mentioned there was still no solid information about him. Intrigued, Hans asks Bowen if he has ever encountered Crosser, and Bowen replies enthusiastically that younger generations may never have seen him. Bowen shares that he once glimpsed Crosser at a banquet a decade ago. Crosser wore somber black attire as though attending a funeral, stared outside the entire evening, and never uttered a word, leaving Bowen puzzled about his presence there. Hans then inquires about Bowen's personal impression of Crosser. Bowen admits he finds Crosser impossible to interpret, since he never had the opportunity to converse with him. Still, he observed something striking when he examined Crosser's eyes closely. One eye was violet, while the other appeared pitch black. Upon hearing this, Hans recognizes the trait as heterochromia. Later, Hans asks Leisha and Asa if they have ever seen Crosser, but both deny it. Hans adds that Annabelle's only lead is a rumor claiming Crosser does not even reside in his own castle. Frustration begins to build within Hans, and he considers abandoning his search for Crosser. At that moment, Leisha reminds him about his preparations for a territorial conflict. Hans acknowledges that the situation is indeed developing that way. Neighboring territories have grown wary of Callista's rapid growth, especially with the steady influx of immigrants. Hans also brings up his intention to properly utilize the Night Order that Leisha will eventually depart from. Although Hans has grown accustomed to Leisha's constant presence, he has deliberately avoided centering future strategies around him, because their 5-year agreement is nearing its end. As a result, the two gradually begin preparing for parting ways. Not long afterward, Grunberg receives notice that he is to report to the castle. Now the castle staff are aware Hans is a maid, yet none of them pry or spread gossip about it. Their loyalty lies in safeguarding the territory and their young lord. Soon after, Grunberg arrives for his audience with Hans. Even knowing Hans is a mage, Grunberg remains amazed at how effortlessly Hans travels between the capital and Callista. Once Hans finishes reviewing William's documents, he shifts his focus to Grunberg. Grunberg announces he has completed the sword commissioned by Hans and presents it. Hans lifts the blade and is surprised by its remarkable lightness. Grunberg explains he halved its weight while doubling its durability and promises full production for the knights by next week. William cannot hide his admiration for Grunberg's extraordinary craftsmanship, crediting Hans' sharp judgment for recognizing such talent. After inspecting the weapon, Hans reveals the next assignment, which involves forging armor for the Night Order. Curious, William asks if Hans drafted the design himself, and Hans confirms he modeled it after the Imperial Night Order. Grunberg points out a hollow section in the chest piece and wonders if it will house the power source. Hans is taken aback and impressed, because Grunberg deduced the purpose of the cavity instantly. Grunberg admits he does not fully grasp the mechanism, but believes the outcome will be exceptional, then departs with the plans. Hans later tells William he has full faith in Grunberg, and William agrees wholeheartedly. William adds one lingering concern: the ongoing drought, noting rainfall has occurred only once that year. Fortunately, Hans' foresight led to constructing a vast reservoir that has sustained them. Still, William fears disaster if the rainy season fails, as the land could wither completely. Hans reassures him that while they cannot control nature, he has prepared measures to prevent famine in Calista and instructs William to calm the people. After concluding the discussion, Hans reflects deeply. He suspects the drought is merely beginning, seeing the fields already parched outside. Yet he refrains from drastic interference despite foreknowledge. He has learned painfully not to tamper recklessly with events that shape countless lives. Hans resolves to remain patient and think through his next moves carefully. Later, Leisha examines Grunberg's sword and praises its quality, though he proudly claims his own blade remains superior. Shortly after, Leisha turns toward Asad and asks about the whereabouts of his bodyguard. Unbeknownst to them, Ryuji always shadows Asad discreetly, remaining unseen. Hans joins in questioning Asad about Ryuji's absence. Asad replies that catfolk tend to roam freely, but assures them Ryuji will return whenever needed. Leisha then asks Hans about upcoming major plans, and Hans replies that he is preoccupied with overseeing the bank and restaurant chain. Hans feels relieved remembering that no major events occurred during this period in his previous life, allowing him to focus on work. Meanwhile, Regina and the Emperor meet at their usual rendezvous, located within an ordinary neighborhood. Both dressed in common attire to avoid drawing attention to themselves, they greet each other warmly, clearly pleased to reunite. The Emperor assures Regina that Ivan's assistance makes their secret meetings possible. However, Regina senses unusual tension in him and gently asks if something troubles him. He confesses receiving yet another marriage proposal from House McCarthy. His mother urges him to at least meet them, as constant refusals might seem disrespectful. Regina suddenly becomes aware that she is involved with the ruler of the empire and realizes nothing guarantees their relationship will continue unchanged. The Emperor asks whether she is content with their current arrangement, leaving her confused. He questions if she is comfortable hiding their identities and pretending their bond is something shameful. Regina nervously says she does not mind, believing he is protecting House Calista from political turmoil by keeping them distant from imperial power struggles. She adds that she has considered their future and would accept remaining friends after his marriage. The Emperor interrupts, declaring that outcome unacceptable. Regina watches in shock as he rises to his feet. He reveals he intends to announce his engagement at the upcoming Imperial Grand Council. Before she can process it, he kneels before her and asks her to become his wife. Regina blushes intensely, covering her mouth in disbelief. Later, Ullman submits the latest banking reports to Hans. Hans is impressed and remarks that Ullman seems better suited for management than butler duties. Ullman humbly attributes success to Hans' exceptional talent in organizing personnel. Ullman inquires about William's performance as successor, and Hans confirms he handles internal matters expertly. Hans then asks about drought conditions elsewhere, noting Callister appears comparatively stable. Ullman confirms the situation outside is grim according to his reports. Auden Bensi reports that farmers are hoarding provisions, and some have abandoned crops entirely, anticipating a devastating famine. Ullman then asks Hans whether there will be trouble if famine strikes and commoners struggle to repay their loans. Hans instructs Ullman not to alter the bank's policies for now and to maintain the current approach. He assures him that he will signal when it becomes necessary to implement further countermeasures. After finishing his discussion with Ullman, Annabelle hurries into the office to inform Hans that they should attend the ball hosted by Viscount Rox next week. Hans clearly shows little interest in the invitation, and Annabelle notices his reaction immediately. He reminds her that he has no desire to participate in social gatherings. Annabelle explains that this event is different, revealing that Lady Swergen is expected to attend. Hans is startled upon hearing the name, fully aware of who she is referring to. Rebecca von Swergen is the reigning star of high society, frequently topping lists of the Empire's most prominent figures despite spending much of her time abroad. As Duke Townsend's granddaughter and an exceptional beauty, she has earned the title Goddess of Beauty. Annabelle reminds Hans that Townsend dotes on Rebecca and that once she leaves the capital, chances to meet her again may vanish, urging him to establish ties. After considering it briefly, Hans thanks Annabelle for her suggestion, but ultimately declines the invitation. He acknowledges Rebecca's influence, but believes she prioritizes commerce over casual social networking. Annabelle counters by reminding him that he is already 20 and of marriageable age, and his mother has begun to worry. Hans responds that marriage is unnecessary at present, though events soon prove otherwise. Later that day, when Hans meets the Emperor, he learns that the Emperor intends to marry Regina. The revelation shocks Hans so deeply that he nearly stumbles, prompting the Emperor to steady him and ask if he is all right. Just an hour earlier, Ivan had invited Hans to the castle. leading Hans to assume it concerned the research institute rather than such grave news. The Emperor suggests they stroll together. He confesses that he proposed to Regina earlier that day. Hans asks about Regina's response and learns she initially refused. He feared she lacked the ability to serve as Empress and might burden both empire and family. Yet she truly longs to stand beside the Emperor if possible. Therefore, she declared she would abide by whatever Hans decides, trusting that her brother always chooses wisely. Hans has long been aware of their bond. As ruler of Callista, he holds authority over Regina's marriage. Nevertheless, a proposal from the imperial household carries enormous weight. He fears it will escalate beyond gossip, recalling Laisha's fate and worrying that nobles may turn hostile. He questions whether he possesses the strength to withstand such pressure. Soon they arrive at the Empress's garden, abundant with blooming lilacs. The Emperor explains it is the most serene and beautiful place within the palace, a refuge he visits whenever he feels isolated. He intends to gift the garden to Regina, considering it his most treasured possession. He wishes to offer her every precious thing he owns to ensure her happiness. Hans recalls that after their dinner 2 years prior, the Emperor ceased inviting them to the palace, likely to divert noble scrutiny during Callista Bank's rise. It seems the Emperor sought to shield Callista from aristocratic pressure. Their secret meetings were likely to avoid drawing attention. Yet bringing Hans into the Empress's private garden signals a shift. Hans senses the Emperor may finally be prepared to confront the dominant nobles. Hans respectfully asks if he may pose a rather bold question. The Emperor encourages him to speak freely. Hans inquires what kind of future the Emperor envisions for the empire. He seeks to understand the direction the nation should take. Emperor pauses, admitting the inquiry differs from what he expected. He answers that though it sounds idealistic, he dreams of a realm where opportunity is universal, a society where people are not confined by rank, birth, gender, or status. Hans realizes he need not fear, because he now holds greater influence than before. He is ready to protect his people even within the imperial court. With renewed resolve, Hans kneels, showing formal respect to the Emperor, and entrusts Regina's future to him. Soon after, the Imperial Grand Council convenes. The Emperor publicly announces his decision to wed Regina. The assembly is stunned into silence. Some doubt his seriousness, arguing that House Callista lacks central political ties and sufficient prestige. Others protest the abruptness, and the Emperor reminds them they have long pressed him to marry. Duke John Townsend cautions that while affection may exist, a state marriage demands careful deliberation. Duke Alan McCarthy echoes the concern, warning that mishandling such matters could disrupt tradition. The Emperor counters that House Callista is an honorable, noble house, and challenges their criteria for dignity. Townsend references the list previously presented to the Emperor, favored alliances with foreign princesses to strengthen the empire, and daughters from prestigious families to preserve legitimacy. McCarthy insists marriage must not be guided by emotion, and declares their refusal to approve. Having ascended the throne young, the Emperor had long been manipulated, but that era is ending. Demands to know whether claims are written in imperial law. He reminds them his own mother lacked influential lineage. He challenges whether they believe the current Empress tainted legitimacy, and condemns their attempt to seize authority under false tradition. With firm resolve, he asserts his sovereignty and states he alone will choose the Empress, adding a decisive condition. If they persist in opposition, he will remain unmarried for life, meaning the imperial bloodline would end with him. Succession would pass to Duke McCarthy. Witnessing his fury, the council members attempt to pacify him, but he rises and leaves the chamber. Later that day, Townsend discusses the council's events with his son Glenite. Glenite struggles to understand and assumes House McCarthy should welcome the outcome, since they would inherit the throne if no heir is born. Yet McCarthy also rejects the idea, deepening Glenite's confusion. Townsend rebukes his son for lacking insight, explaining that despite ambition, no house would recklessly gamble with the empire's revered legacy. Moreover, if that scenario unfolds, it will inevitably spark a full-scale war, which would clearly conclude with one faction being utterly destroyed. Townsend notes that the Emperor's tone was nothing like it used to be. It seems he has cast off all restraints, leaving everyone with no option but to comply with his desires. Townsend admits he plans to support the marriage simply to observe how far the Emperor's newfound drive will carry him. Townsend cannot help but question whether Regina or Hans influenced the Emperor's transformation. Later, Hans and Regina inform their mother about the arranged marriage, and she reacts with shock, scolding them for not telling her sooner. Hans offers an apology, unaware that their mother does not realize that all of these events unfolded within a single day. Their mother explains that she generally does not meddle in her children's marital decisions. Yet she reminds Regina that becoming Empress requires far more than mutual affection between her and the Emperor. Hans responds by saying he understands her apprehension, reassures her that Regina and the Emperor are ready to confront whatever lies ahead together. Furthermore, Hans promises to safeguard the family at all costs and asks his mother to place her faith in both him and Regina. Hearing his words, their mother smiles warmly. She praises him, remarking that he speaks with the wisdom of someone far older. He then tells Regina she has no objections as long as her children are happy, and Regina expresses gratitude for her blessing. Their mother finally admits she had suspected for some time, having noticed Regina slipping out disguised in commoner attire. He asks Regina to share the story of how she first encountered the Emperor. At that moment, Hans mentions that the Emperor has requested a meeting with their mother. Soon afterward, the Emperor meets Omar, along with her relatives, on the upper level of the Seabreeze restaurant. Their mother is startled by the restaurant setting, but the Emperor clarifies that the location was his own choice. Hans encourages everyone to begin eating. He assures them that only the finest ingredients were selected for the meal. The gathering proceeds smoothly and pleasantly. Hans feels relieved seeing his mother finally at ease. Ivan is equally delighted, as he never imagined, witnessing the Emperor marry for love. Ivan thanks Hans, saying their lives changed for the better after meeting him and Regina. Seizing the moment, Hans confides in Ivan that he has a challenging request. Ivan is taken aback to learn Hans wants to recruit his disciples as instructors at the academy. It becomes clear that the Emperor already knows about the academy under construction in Calista. Hans explains that magical studies have declined and insists that skilled imperial mages are essential to nurture exceptional talent. However, he emphasizes that relocating the disciples from the capital requires both the Emperor's and Ivan's consent. Hans' mother frowns at him discussing business in such a venue, but Regina reassures her that she too cares about the Academy's progress. The Emperor and Ivan both express willingness to consider his proposal favorably. Still, they caution that the disciples themselves may not necessarily agree. Ivan explains that the Institute's mages deliberately avoid noble employment, choosing honor under the Emperor over wealth from servitude. He warns that inviting them to teach at a private academy could offend their principles. Hans tells Ivan he understands these concerns. He reveals that he intends to personally mentor the future professors, given that he is a Sixth Circle mage. The Emperor is astonished, as it is the first time Hans openly admits not only being a mage, but also revealing his rank. Even Regina is shocked to discover her brother has reached the Sixth Circle. Unbeknownst to them, Hans' true power actually surpasses that level. Ivan reacts dramatically, clutching Hans' shirt and eagerly asking if he too may apply to teach. Eventually, the Imperial Grand Council formally sanctions the state marriage between Regina and the Emperor. Ivan's 3 disciples are appointed as professors, though they remain displeased due to ignorance about Hans. Ivan assures Hans that once they learn the truth, they will be deeply grateful to him. Despite the success, Hans feels uneasy that events are unfolding too smoothly. A subtle sense of dread lingers in his heart. His anxiety soon manifests in a brutal and unexpected way. Sometime later, Hans walks through town with Asura and Leisha. When a man posing as a thief attempts to approach Leisha, Hans quickly subdues him, and Asura is amazed that anyone would foolishly target a guard knight openly. As the man is restrained, he begins ranting about nobles living comfortably while commoners starve. To Leisha's surprise, Hans instructs him to release the man. Leisha assumes Hans intends to set him free. Instead, Hans clarifies that he should stop hitting him and deliver him to the authorities. Hans understands the worsening situation stems from the fact as farmers depend entirely on their yearly harvests for survival. Upon returning home, they notice numerous carriages outside. Leaving Hans stunned, he wonders why so many visitors have gathered there. Ullman rushes over, explaining that people have been arriving non-stop to see Hans or Regina. Since they are high-ranking nobles, Ullman felt unable to refuse them. Hans orders that all audience requests be declined for now. Previously, nobles sought Hans only when desperate for financial assistance. But now that Regina is declared future empress, many seek alliances for their own benefit. Hans anticipated both the famine and increased noble interest after Regina's announcement. Their combined impact produces consequences he never foresaw. Before long, whispers begin circulating that famine is somehow the fault of the new empress. Rumors claim the heavens are displeased with the emperor's choice of bride. Hans enters Regina's chamber to find her weeping, as their mother consoles her. He is shocked because Regina was meant to go out that day to view wedding gowns. Her mother explains that a disgraceful incident occurred. She recounts how someone tried to hurl filth while accusing Regina of tainting the imperial bloodline, though a guard knight intervened in time. Hans is devastated upon hearing the story. Regina steadies herself and tells him she is unharmed, admitting she was only startled but will prepare to endure such hostility. Hans drops to his knees before her. He insists she must never accept such slander, as she has committed no wrongdoing. Regina breaks down again, arguing that the people are not entirely wrong since famine has indeed struck the realm. Hans firmly counters that he has a solution to resolve the crisis. Soon after, a public proclamation echoes throughout the land. It announces that Regina has ordered relief grain to be distributed to all imperial subjects. Citizens are astonished to learn they will receive wheat free of charge. In the year 858, while a devastating famine ravaged the country, relief efforts commenced under Regina's name. Lord overseeing the slums fumes upon hearing she acted without consulting him. His aide points out that Regina acted under her authority as future empress, not merely as a count. It is, in fact, the responsibility of the regional lords to manage their lands and ensure their people's welfare. Yet most lords offer only minimal assistance during famines. They provide just enough to prevent deaths, while leveraging aid to secure loyalty. Angered that Regina deviates from tradition, the lord deems her naive, believing early famine victims will not value her generosity. The attendant then warns that the wheat distribution could drive market prices down sharply. Reports that wheat now sells for 8 copper coins per bundle, compared to 60 the previous day, shocking the lord. The aide explains that House Callista supplies retailers directly with contracts capping prices at 8 copper coins. Enraging the lord, who complains Hans is meddling in his domain. The attendant further informs him that the relief initiative is being carried out simultaneously throughout the entire empire, not limited solely to their own domain. Upon hearing this, the lord is baffled, questioning how House Callista managed to secure such vast stores of wheat. House Callista distributing grain throughout the empire, they successfully curbed the soaring wheat prices. The origins of this famine response trace back 2 years to a meeting when Durin von Chenovich approached the bank seeking a loan. That was when Durin was informed of the specific terms tied to the 7,000 gold he wished to borrow. In essence, for 5 years he would grant Callista exclusive rights to purchase half of his territory's wheat harvest. He would also repay the interest in the same manner, and Hans advised him to review the agreement carefully and flag anything unfavorable. Noticing Durin's prolonged silence, Hans inquires whether surrendering 50% seemed excessive, but Durin anxiously denies it. He admits he expected harsher terms, since lending 7,000 gold could have justified demanding complete monopoly control. Durin then wonders if Hans intends to venture into grain distribution, given that Callista faces no food shortages. Historically, crises often widen the gap between wealthy elites and struggling commoners. In his previous life, Hans witnessed countless deaths fueled by aristocratic greed. Wheat that once cost 5 copper coins skyrocketed to 100, forcing even farmers into lifelong debt. Anticipating this, Hans sold Chenovich wheat sparingly to avoid market disruption while stockpiling the remainder. As a result, Callista amassed reserves large enough to aid every imperial citizen with surplus remaining. Relief efforts in the capital concluded swiftly, while other provinces submitted urgent appeals. Before long, Hans realizes he has become so overwhelmed that he lacks personal time again. Observing his strain, Leisha questions why Hans oversees distribution personally instead of wholesaling to merchants. Hans explains that entrusting major firms risks price manipulation once they secure bulk supplies. Sa remarks that Hans is acting differently this time, because the grain is being handed out under Regina's name. Leisha and Hans are startled that Asa considered such political implications. Sa is correct, as Hans never intended to exploit disaster for advantage, having always avoided clashes with nobles. He even distanced himself from gatherings to prevent alliances or rivalries. With Regina ascending as empress, neutrality is no longer possible. It is undeniable that House Callista is now tied to the imperial family. Hans informs his aide that Callista's strength can now reinforce the throne, prompting him to adopt a firmer position. Leisha grins after hearing Hans' resolve. Hans checks on Regina's well-being, having entrusted Leisha with her safety, and receives assurance that all is well. He apologizes for assigning such responsibility, but Leisha insists circumstances have shifted. Now, whenever Regina ventures into the city, he is greeted with applause and gratitude. Hans is pleased, recognizing that the relief plan is succeeding. Suddenly, Ullman reports that Joel Trading Company seeks an audience. Hans is puzzled since he declined all visitors. His curiosity rises upon learning Ivan accompanies them. Annabelle had earlier cautioned Hans about Joel's ties to Ivan, the possibility he might leverage that link to approach him. Hans receives Ivan and Joel formally, apologizing for any discourtesy. Despite Leisha's displeasure, Hans reassures him it is manageable. The man introduces himself as Kirk Joel and expresses regret for prior impoliteness. Joel states his purpose is to secure rights to distribute Callista's wheat. Hans asks if he understands why merchants were previously excluded, and Joel affirms he does. Joel acknowledges Hans' priority of public welfare and promises his firm seeks network expansion rather than retail profit. Therefore, they will adhere strictly to Hans' set pricing without markup. Joel anticipates Hans questioning his reliability. To prove sincerity, he offers to transfer his company's deposits to Callista Bank, effectively making Callista their primary financial institution. Callista gained clients during Sullivan Bank's scandal. Major firms still favored established credit, leaving only 2 small companies fully committed. Hans recognizes the immense benefit of adding a top 10 company as a main client, yet worries because Joel currently banks with Sullivan, and such a switch could provoke accusations of poaching. Considering Sullivan is backed by House McCarthy, an imperial pillar, Hans contemplates whether confrontation is inevitable. After brief reflection, Hans agrees to the proposal. Joel responds enthusiastically, and they promptly begin drafting terms. Hans realizes he has already antagonized several nobles through relief efforts. Moreover, Sullivan likely resents Callista over prior financial setbacks. Once the contract is prepared, Joel is surprised by Hans' generous supply price, narrowing Callista's margins. Hans explains that since merchants pursue profit, offering Joel fair returns ensures cooperation. Joel admires this foresight, emphasizing his reputation matters most and citing his unprecedented trade with the cat people. Hans suddenly understands. Joel earned the title negotiation genius as the only imperial trader to successfully deal with the cat people. Hans notices Joel glancing at Asura, implying recognition. Surprised that Joel identified Asura despite his sealed aura, Hans asks how. Joel answers it was simple. He remarks that only cat people possess such exquisite and luxurious fur. Ivan is stunned to learn the familiar cat is actually a cat person. Joel approaches Asura respectfully and bows, addressing him as Shah's son. Asura transforms into human form and questions Joel's knowledge. Joel claims he never forgets a face, even if Asura does not recall him. Disturbed, Asura abruptly flees the room. Later, Hans goes to room where Asura hides and asks permission to enter. Hans long suspected Asura hailed from a prominent feline tribe. Joel's reference to Shah confirms Asura is the Cat King's son. Hans sits beside Asura, offering comfort. Asura confesses that the one who inflicted his earlier wounds was his own brother. His brother attempted to murder him, forcing him to flee. Asura fears discovery will bring hunters after him. Shocked, Hans asks if rivalry for succession sparked it. Asura denies it, explaining only legitimate heirs inherit Shah, and as an illegitimate son he had no claim, leaving motive unclear. He admits ignorance about his brother's reasons. From Asura's tone, Hans senses deep trauma. Hans assures him Joel agreed to protect his secret. Ivan was also informed and pledged silence. Both swore the truth would remain hidden regardless of circumstances. Hans promises Asura safety under his protection, regards Asura as family now, and reminds him he may stay indefinitely. On the imperial wedding morning, Hans arrives first at Regina's chamber to check on her. He inquires about her condition. She admits it all feels surreal. Regina describes exhaustion from endless preparation and jewelry selection. Hans understands her fatigue, but recognizes excitement fuels it as well. He asks for her hand, saying he has a prep. Hans lifts his hand to remove the necklace from his neck, gently sets it into Regina's palms, leaving her utterly astonished. Several hours later, Regina and the Emperor are formally united within the palace walls. Traditionally, royal weddings were extravagant state affairs. Yet due to the severe famine, the ceremony was kept modest and confined to the imperial palace. This decision was ultimately made out of sensitivity toward public opinion. At the site, Ivan ensured security measures were firmly established. Protective spells were cast around the banquet hall. Weapons were meticulously inspected at the entrance, allowing Hans to ease his guard slightly. Even so, he had taken precautions, as the necklace he gifted Regina was a powerful artifact. That explains why Regina reacted with such shock upon receiving it. Hans instructed her to keep it on at all times and to conceal its abilities from everyone. Regina quietly asks whether the imperial palace is truly so perilous. Hans affirms it is, warning her that trust is a rare commodity within those walls. Now inside the grand hall, Hans hopes sincerely that Regina will never be forced to rely on the necklace. After completing the formal rites, they proceed to the reception, which signals the start of subtle political maneuvering. The event serves as an opportunity to forge alliances as the Emperor's brother-in-law. Soon enough, Hans greets Duke Townsend respectfully, and they exchange a firm handshake. By the end of it, Hans senses overwhelming pressure from the Duke, far more intense than his earlier encounter with Sullivan. It becomes obvious to Hans that Townsend harbors ill intent. He questions whether the gesture was a veiled threat or deliberate intimidation. Shortly after, he is informed that Prince Carlisle of Garcia wishes to greet him. As customary, Hans approaches and surprises the distant prince by speaking in Garcia's native tongue. Astonished, Carlisle asks if Hans truly knows the language. and Hans modestly claims basic knowledge, concealing that it came from the dragon's memories. Carlyle eagerly clasps Hans, praising him as the first in the Empire to speak Garcia so flawlessly. He complains that no one else understands him, and his interpreter has proven nearly useless, leaving him exasperated. Word quickly spreads that Hans speaks Garcia, granting Carlyle freedom to converse comfortably. Guests begin speculating that Hans may have trade ambitions tied to Garcia. At that moment, a gentle voice calls from behind. Turning around, Hans beholds a strikingly beautiful. She compliments his mastery of the foreign language. She inquires whether he has traveled abroad and what distant lands he has seen. Hans answers that he has never left the Empire and gained his knowledge solely through study. Curious in return, he politely asks for her identity. She apologizes for the oversight and introduces herself as Rebecca Swergen. Hans realizes she is the most sought-after lady in high society, and the very woman Annabelle once mentioned. Before long, onlookers notice Rebecca conversing with him. It is unprecedented for her to approach a man first. Rebecca soon becomes aware that they are drawing attention. She offers to withdraw to spare Hans' discomfort, but he reassures her and remarks that the evening has only begun. Despite this, she chooses to depart, hinting they may meet again if destiny allows. Several gentlemen rush to escort her, making clear why she commands such admiration. Having greeted the principal figures, Hans considers taking a short rest. Suddenly, Claude appears behind him. Hans asks about his condition, though in truth it is not Claude at all. The figure beneath the disguise is Leisha, eager to witness the ceremony. Hans had used illusion magic to give him Claude's appearance. Earlier, Hans asked whether Leisha could endure facing nobles responsible for his family's downfall. Leisha admits it might be difficult, yet he would regret missing the Emperor's wedding more than confronting them. Together, Hans and Leisha stand quietly, watching Regina and the Emperor clasp hands to herald a new beginning. Later, Regina spends the entire morning in conversation with the Emperor's mother, the Dowager. Dowager laments missing the ceremony, but Regina gently prioritizes her recovery. Regina shares that she once cared for her own ailing mother and understands a patient's hardship. She expresses her wish to be a comforting presence for the Dowager. Deeply impressed, the Dowager feels unworthy of such a gracious daughter-in-law. Noticing her son at the doorway, she urges Regina to join her waiting husband. The Emperor enters, clarifying he only wished to ensure harmony between them. Nevertheless, the Dowager insists Regina go attend to him. After paying their respects, the couple takes their leave. The Dowager smiles, delighted to see her son's renewed happiness. Walking the palace corridors, the Emperor thanks Regina for uplifting his mother's spirits. Regina replies that the Dowager reminds her of her own mother, making kindness natural. An attendant then informs her of a letter from House Callista. Reading it, Regina is amazed to learn that Hans' academy has been completed. When Hans tours the grounds, he is stunned by its immense scale. Ullman confidently declares it will become the continent's premier institution, exactly as Hans envisioned. Asag grows weary from the vastness of the campus and barely recalls the details of the tour. Hans offers to clarify everything using a map and explains that the academy comprises 3 divisions: administrative studies, knight training, and magical studies, with a central building for shared foundational courses. He also outlines the dormitories and dining facilities. Leisha interjects, questioning whether students will accept communal living. Hans recognizes Leisha's difficulty in grasping the concept that nobles and commoners will reside under the same roof. Resistance is already strong among nobles, many refusing to enroll their children. However, Hans reveals his plan, stating admission depends on 2 standards: either immense tuition and noble lineage, or merit alone, since talent can outweigh birthright. Even Leisha has witnessed commoners surpass nobles in ability. Hans gestures toward the magic department, noting the Empire has 4 academies, yet only 2 nominally teach magic, and even they lack genuine expertise. His academy differs, as Imperial mages and Ivan's disciples will instruct students. Anyone aspiring to magic, regardless of status, must enroll there. Meanwhile, Ivan's disciples journey toward the academy, confused about their sudden reassignment to an unfamiliar institution. One suspects political pressure due to Callista's ties to the throne, but another disagrees, insisting Ivan would never compromise professionalism with personal matters. Upon hearing of Hans' academy, Townsend formulates various suspicions. He assumes Hans used Regina to gain proximity to the Emperor. Also speculates Ivan powers the Seabreeze restaurant with magic, implying Callista ownership. Townsend concludes similar tactics were used in banking, believing Ivan aided Hans with the counterfeit detector. Dade attempts to point out inconsistencies in the timeline. Irritated, Townsend admits his true concern is Hans' approach, specifically Hans' persistent effort to unite nobles and commoners within the same sphere. Townsend begins to suspect that Hans may be attempting to undermine noble prestige or pursue hidden political goals. Unable to read Hans' intentions, Townsend concludes that Hans must be removed. shocking his aide who warns that matters are far more complicated now. He points out that Hans led a major relief effort and is the Emperor's brother-in-law, making it extremely difficult to tarnish his name. Townsend's expression hardens as he clarifies that the removal he envisions is far more drastic than mere reputation damage. He orders preparations to begin for an undisclosed plan, declaring that it is time to send Hans to his end. Soon afterward, news of the Academy spreads through the capital, igniting endless speculation. Nevertheless, the long-awaited morning of the entrance ceremony arrives. Two magic studies freshmen, Jane and Anthony, chat in the cafeteria where meals are free, though students may also visit the campus dining district. The dining district offers snacks and specialty dishes, all subsidized to ease financial strain on students. As promised, Hans names the institution Seyfried Academy. Anthony beams with pride that a commoner like him earned admission. Jane excitedly notes that the dormitories provide private single rooms. At that moment, a noble strolls past. He mocks them loudly, labeling them noisy commoners. Despite such attitudes, many nobles enroll, eager to learn from Ivan's disciples. Some even transferred from other academies solely to join this one. Jane and Anthony are thrilled, realizing they were accepted based on merit. Suddenly, Rebecca approaches and asks their impressions of the academy. Anthony is stunned that a noble would address them, especially one as strikingly beautiful as she is. He becomes completely flustered. Jane promises to answer, but explains they are new students with limited knowledge. Rebecca asks what the name Seyfried signifies. Hans previously attached the Callista name to all ventures, making this choice unusual. Jane admits she never considered the name's origin, and Anthony adds the guidebook offers no explanation. Rebecca realizes even the students are unaware, yet she thanks them politely. As she prepares to depart, Anthony asks which department she belongs to. He clarifies she is merely visiting the campus. Anthony recalls that the academy is open to the public for the inaugural day. Indeed, a reporter is present on the grounds. When he spots Rebecca the Wanderer, he quickly raises his camera to capture her image. He anticipated her attendance due to her adventurous spirit. Rebecca is known for exploring unfamiliar places out of pure curiosity. She observes nobles still uneasy about sharing space with commoners. Meanwhile, the commoners radiate excitement. This confirms Rebecca's theory that Hans is an unusually intriguing figure. Her attention then shifts to a distant man. Something about him feels suspicious. Their gazes meet briefly, and his heterochromatic eyes reveal him as Marquis Crosser. Crosser promptly turns away and departs. Recognizing Rebecca as Townsend's granddaughter, he decides caution is wise. Soon he passes another individual who also piques his interest, wondering what sort of forces Hans has gathered before students are summoned to the main hall. Some nobles grumble about standing alongside commoners. Shortly thereafter, Chairman Hans steps forward to speak. He welcomes attendees from near and far and declares the ceremony underway. In his address, he emphasizes equality as the Academy's foundation. He speaks of granting education opportunities to all, fostering a cycle where learning benefits society. Parents are astonished by Hans' youth and question how he gained such educational insight. Some suspecting bank profits funded it. Nearby, Ivan's disciples overhear the parents' conversations and sense their distrust toward Hans. Tara remarks she cares little for opinions since she follows Ivan's directive. She suspects Hans views the academy as a business venture. Byron disagrees, stating he examined the main hall and found it constructed with superior craftsmanship. He argues Hans would not invest so heavily without genuine passion for the art of magic. Porto remains skeptical, believing Hans may have wealth but lacks magical expertise. During the speech, Hans senses unfamiliar mana currents. Unsure whether they stem from Ivan's students, he continues the ceremony while Leisha and Asa observe from afar. Asa remarks that Hans speaks with uncanny composure, as if reborn, and Leisha credits careful preparation. Leisha teases Asa for not wandering off as usual. Asa replies that today feels different and something seems amiss. Suddenly, his heightened senses detect danger, prompting him to leap forward instinctively. Leisha restrains him to prevent rash action. In the next instant, the roof begins to crumble. Chaos erupts throughout the hall. A noble blames poor materials, but his wife urges him to rescue their daughters instead. As destruction worsens, Leisha urges Hans to flee while others evacuate. Hans commands calm and prepares to cast a spell, yet he feels an unseen force restraining him. Recognizes the same energy destabilizing the structure binds him. Realizing he is trapped by a hold spell cast by another maid. Amid the turmoil, Porto attempts to act, but Tara pulls him back to escape first. Hans is horrified to grasp that a mage intends mass murder. A suspicious figure from earlier is indeed responsible. Begins to revel in the chaos. Hans shatters the binding spell in an instant. The attacker sees this and is seized by terror. Late as Hands, fury ignites and his eyes glow yellow. The villain trembles, losing balance and falling. Those remaining witness Hands levitating. Even Asura is stunned by his open display of magic. Hands knows the stakes differ greatly from past crises. He must shield everyone from falling debris to prevent catastrophe. He calculates the need for a spell both immense and precise. Unleashes the 8th circle spell Sanctuary, generating support, arrays to stabilize the collapsing structure. At that moment, all present realize they are witnessing true magic. Porto stares in utter disbelief, understanding that Hands is undeniably a mage. Seizing the distraction, Leisha shouts for mages to focus on evacuation. As the crowd begins filing out of the hall, Hands approaches the trembling dark mage to question him directly. After they step outside the ruined hall, same ill-mannered noble loudly declares he will return to his territory at once. Yet his daughter Isla refuses, insisting she will stay and enroll at the academy. He argues the structures are unsafe and fears other buildings may collapse as well. Isla counters that he witnessed Hands' magic firsthand and reminds him other academies barely teach real magic, a truth her father cannot deny. She adds that Hands appears to be an extraordinary mage and suggests the disaster felt more like a deliberate assault. Her father presses her to clarify what she means. Isla explains she saw Hands approach a suspicious man during the evacuation and sensed guilt in his frozen stance. Concluding it was no accident, the noble decides to remain until the investigation concludes. Nearby, a frantic noblewoman seizes Porto, demanding he treat her injured son immediately, though Porto calmly reassures her. He explains the wounds are minor and critical patients must come first, while her son supports this reasoning. Porto notes that healing magic is taxing and must be reserved for the gravely wounded. Tara arrives to report she and Byron exhausted their mana treating lighter cases, so Porto volunteers to finish the rest. Mother overhears their discussion of depleted mana and panics over what will happen to the children still fighting for their lives. Porto apologizes sincerely, clarifying that mages are not omnipotent healers capable of miracles. At that precise moment, Hands steps forward, ordering them to bring him to the critically injured children. As he walks away, Tara notices his eyes have returned to normal, despite seeing them glow yellow earlier. Butler presents 2 children in dire condition, explaining ambulances were already summoned since healing seemed impossible. Ignoring the explanation, Hands kneels and places his hands upon them. Porto watches in disbelief, convinced Hands is being reckless because magic cannot simply erase such injuries. Even basic 3rd-tier healing spells are risky, let alone treating life-threatening wounds. Everyone's shocked. Hands channels an overwhelming surge of mana, restoring both children instantly. Witnesses stare in astonishment as the injuries vanish completely, without leaving even a trace of scarring. Some begin to suspect Hands rivals Ivan's level. Porto, however, realizes Hands far surpasses a 5th circle mate. Hands manages a few unsteady steps before collapsing from exhaustion. Thankfully, Leisha catches him in time. He asks if Hands is injured, but Hands admits only mana depletion. Hands inquires whether the culprit was secured, and Leisha shakes his head, explaining Asura is guarding him and noting the mage offered no resistance. Leisha advises Hands to rest since the wounded are safe. Suddenly, Leisha senses that oppressive aura. He spots Crosser nearby, yet fails to recognize his true identity. Though Crosser shows no hostility, Leisha feels the danger radiating from him. Crosser studies Hands and Leisha silently, then turns and departs without a word. Confusion clouds Leisha's mind as Hands notices his tension. Leisha downplays it and urges a swift return to the castle. Soon Regina and the Emperor arrive at Callista Castle. Hands greets them as Regina rushes to check his condition. The Emperor admits he feared being late for the ceremony, never imagining such calamity, and asks if Hands is harmed. Hands reassures them he merely exhausted his mana and will recover with rest. The Emperor then questions whether the collapse was accidental. Hands responds that the matter is far more severe, suggesting they speak privately in the reception room. As they proceed inside, the Emperor orders heightened castle security. Ivan moves to follow them. His students grab him and pull him aside. Their expressions burn with frustration as they confront him, accusing him of hiding the truth that Hands is an archmage. Ivan explains only he and the Emperor knew, adding that Hands insisted on secrecy, and the Emperor supported that decision. Now that the truth is exposed, Ivan fears the Dukes will react strongly. The trio panic, recalling their earlier disrespect toward Hands. Tara contemplates desperate apologies, even kneeling, but Porto tells her she is overreacting. Ivan reminds them Hands promised personal instruction in exchange for teaching positions. Overwhelmed, they jokingly offer themselves as magical test subjects. Ivan intensifies matters by confessing he envies them since Hands is a 6th circle archmage. Porto struggles to accept that rank. Ivan urges them to reconsider what they witnessed firsthand. Porto admits Hands' spellcasting was strange since no chant was heard. Tara adds that the healing magic amazed her most, leaving Ivan stunned to learn of it. She confesses she cannot comprehend how Hans shaped his mana so precisely. Byron then raises a curious point about the Academy's name, noting Seyfried belonged to a legendary golden dragon. He half-jokes Hans could be a dragon, but Ivan dismisses the idea as fantasy. Porto supports Ivan, reminding Byron dragons vanished a century ago, and Ivan suggests the name honors magic's draconic origins. Ivan warns them to stop prying into Hans' affairs, as mages dislike scrutiny. Afterward, he leaves them to their discussion. The trio continues speculating about Hans and how he might restore magic to its former glory. Ivan then rejoins Hans, the Emperor, and Regina in the reception chamber. Hans greets him warmly and reveals the captured attacker was a maid. The revelation shocks them, as magical terrorism seems unthinkable. Ivan worries Imperial mages were involved, but Hans denies it, saying he can perceive mana signatures. He states the culprit is a fourth circle maid, also practices dark magic. Since no Imperial mage holds that rank, suspicion lessens, though the Emperor asks Hans to confirm the dark affiliation. Hans affirms it firmly as tension rises. Ivan suddenly reveals the culprit's name is Kennen, unfamiliar to the others. His trembling voice heightens their unease. Outside, First Knight Commander Petros and Royal Guard Captain Crispin coordinate defensive formations. Petros reflects he never expected to return to the castle after past events, when he and his unit once pursued Laisha. On the same night, Regina was insulted. Now he serves loyally under the Empress. Crispin grows curious about Laisha's supposed death and asks if Petros confirmed the body. Petros replies the corpse was badly decomposed, yet Crispin presses for proof it truly belonged to Laisha. Petros begins questioning Crispin's sudden interest in Laisha's situation, but Crispin brushes the matter aside and urges him to drop it. Unbeknownst to them, Laisha observes their exchange quietly from the window of his office. It becomes clear that there is some kind of link between him and Crispin. Returning to the reception hall, Ivan tells the three that Kennen had been his closest friend for years and was hailed as a remarkable prodigy among the Imperial mages. He became the first of his peers to master fourth circle magic. The entire institute buzzed with awe and praise. Yet not everyone welcomed the rise of a common-born mage like Kennen. Soon afterward, two mages approached Kennen. They presented him with what they claimed was a fourth circle spell formula and pressed him to enhance and display it for them. Upon reviewing the formula, Kennen sensed something was wrong, but the pair kept pushing him forward. Eager to win their approval, Kennen hesitated. He saw this as a chance to earn their support. Once he activated the spell, it revealed itself to be dark magic. The forbidden power soon consumed him entirely. Dark magic differs from ordinary spells that rely on a caster's mana. Instead, it trades one's soul to demons in exchange for limitless energy. Due to the atrocities committed by its users, the Empire branded dark magic as treason and banned it for centuries, making it nearly impossible to identify from a mere formula. Kennen tried to tell the judges he had been deceived, but they refused to listen, insisting that using dark magic left no room for excuses. He was subsequently expelled from the Research Institute by judicial order. They also sentenced him to death for practicing forbidden magic. Ivan confesses that this was the last news he ever received about Kennen, more than a decade ago. Believing his friend had been executed, Ivan now suspects the newly emerged dark mage might actually be Kennen. Hans proposes that Ivan meet Kennen in person to verify his suspicion. He then guides them down into the basement. The Emperor is startled to find no guards stationed there, but Hans explains that none are necessary. At that moment, the Emperor notices Ivan concealing his face. He questions whether something is amiss. Hans suddenly recalls his oversight and apologizes, explaining that he erected a barrier, allowing only himself to use magic inside the prison. With Ivan's magic suppressed, Hans kindly offers to avert his eyes if Ivan prefers not to reveal his true appearance. Internally, Ivan marvels at Hans' strength, amazed that he can create a barrier that selectively restricts mana usage. Having never heard of such advanced magic, Ivan realizes Hans far surpasses him in skill. They soon reach the prison cell. The moment Kennen sees Ivan, he recoils from the door. Ivan affirms that the prisoner is indeed Kennen and informs Hans accordingly. Surprised, Hans admits there is a complication, explains that Kennen appears mentally unstable and cannot even hold a normal conversation. Ivan wonders how Kennen ended up like this, but Hans confesses ignorance. Since his arrest, Hans says, Kennen has behaved strangely without pause. While Hans confirms Kennen's use of dark magic, his current condition prevents formal charges, and the Emperor proposes transferring the case to the Imperial Palace to learn why a condemned man surfaced in Callista territory. Ivan struggles to accept this reality, remembering Kennen as someone too gentle to harm anyone. Suddenly, clarity returns to Kennen's eyes. he recognizes Ivan standing beyond the iron bars. Elsewhere, Leisha and Asura climb a tower to survey the estate from above. Leisha explains they are investigating the suspicious individual he noticed at the academy. He admits the man is powerful, though his intentions remain unclear. With Licia worn out and the Emperor and Empress away, Licia insists they remain vigilant to prevent serious harm. Asura remarks in surprise that Leisha invited him along despite often grumbling about him. Swallowing his pride, Leisha confesses he cannot face Crosser alone after what he witnessed. Asura is taken aback by this admission. Still, he reassures Leisha that feline folk excel at sensing danger. Asura continues chatting casually when he abruptly notices Crosser in the distance. He immediately alerts Leisha to the sight. Leisha verifies it is the same individual from before. In an instant, the man disappears from view. Witnessing this, Asura reluctantly concedes that Leisha was correct about their limits against Crosser. After completing their reconnaissance, they report to Hans in his chamber about their findings. Leisha notes that the man appeared both at the academy and the estate, implying Hans is the target. He explains that he and Asura attempted to intervene, yet they were clearly outmatched by Crosser. Leisha urges Hans to exercise extreme caution. Hans is puzzled, as he had cast a light detection spell around the castle meant to sense any intruders. Since the spell detected nothing, Hans concludes the intruder must be a maid. Meanwhile, Ivan, the Emperor, and Regina remain confined to the castle because of the situation. Ivan had requested a private audience with Kenan from Hans. Hans initially declined, citing Kenan's severe crime. Ivan assures him he has no intention of absolving Kenan of responsibility. The Emperor adds that Ivan is capable of separating personal feelings from matters of state. Considering recent events, Hans suspects Crosser may be collaborating with Kenan and planning further wrongdoing. He resolves to elevate the castle's defenses to maximum level. Days later, Hans' mother hurries from the capital after hearing the rumors, noting that the empire is in turmoil. People are whispering about the rise of a new archmage. Though aware her son practices magic, Owen wonders whether he stands apart from others. Seeing their curiosity, Hans decides to reveal the truth. He confesses to his mother and sister that he is no ordinary mage, but the successor of a dragon. Shocked, Owen questions how this could be possible since dragons vanished long ago. Hans proceeds to recount the full story. After listening carefully, Owen is astonished to learn of a dragon's lair in the Compton Mountains, and Regina recalls Hans behaving oddly around that period. Owen understands why her son kept silent. The mountains bordering Townsend and McCarthy lands. Discovery of the lair could have sparked a territorial war. Fortunately, Hans' prudence prevented such conflict. Owen wonders if the recent attack ties to the dragon's lair, and Hans admits uncertainty, but suspects someone sought his death under the pretense of destroying the structure. He asks if he feels afraid, reminding him that despite his strength, he remains her child and should not bear burdens alone. She encourages him to rely on family whenever overwhelmed, and Regina affirms that as Empress she can be of support. Owen feels relieved seeing her children thriving in such high position. In truth, Hans does not fear for himself. His real concern is that his loved ones might suffer harm beyond his protection. That same night, Crosser approaches the castle once more, and he senses that a far stronger barrier now surrounds the grounds. Even so, he shatters it and slips into the estate without much trouble. In his chamber, Hans detects a faint disturbance within the barrier's mana, yet he is baffled because the barrier shows no visible response. Moments later, Crosser steps through the window into his room. Fred seizes Hans as he realizes his sixth circle barrier has been penetrated. He notes the intruder's aura differs from Kenan's, and upon noticing his mismatched eyes, he understands that the man before him is Crosser. Hans speaks his name aloud, surprising Crosser that he has been recognized. Countless thoughts race through Hans' mind as he wonders whether Crosser orchestrated everything. Suddenly, Crosser poses an unexpected question, demands to know why dragon energy is emanating from Hans' body. After all, his appearance is unmistakably human, yet the power flowing through him clearly belongs to a dragon. In a cold and menacing tone, Crosser demands to know what exactly Hans is. The intensity of the question terrifies Hans so badly, he nearly loses control. Hans recalls the warnings Leisha and Asura had given him about Crosser. Connecting all the pieces, he realizes that Crosser is far more dangerous than he imagined. Trembling, Hans warns Crosser not to take another step closer. He suddenly remembers that his entire family is inside the castle, and if he falls, they will be exposed to danger. Driven by desperation to shield them, he unleashes an airburst spell. To his astonishment, Crosser does not even bother to move aside. The spell strikes him directly, yet it disintegrates harmlessly, leaving Crosser completely unscathed. Beads of sweat roll down Hans' face as doubt creeps in. He had believed he stood at the summit of magical strength. Now he realizes that assumption was painfully wrong. Crosser then voices his own surprise at what he witnessed. He points out that Hans cast the spell without any incantation. Intrigued, he presses Hans once more to reveal his true nature. Hans senses that Crosser's interest stems from curiosity rather than hostility. He admits that the power he wields is indeed dragon magic, just as Crosser suspected. Hans explains he is a human who inherited a dragon's strength and can use dragon word spells, yet refuses to elaborate further for Crosser's sake. Crosser then inquires whether the dragon who granted him power was the golden dragon Seyfried. Startled, Hans asks if Crosser can truly identify that just by observing him. He wonders if Crosser has ties to Seyfried, but Crosser denies it, saying the Academy's name gave him the hint, and adding that he too was born after the dragons vanished. In an unexpected confession, Crosser reveals he is a guardian, specifically the chosen guardian of the black dragon Lekentos. Hans is taken aback, never imagining a human could bear such a role. Crosser introduces himself properly as Chai-von Crosser. He explains that his grandfather first inherited the dragon's mark before it was eventually passed down to him. Hans is astonished since dragons disappeared over 5 centuries ago, and Crosser clarifies that those marked gain long lives, though the blood weakens with each generation as shown by his grandfather living 500 years and his father only 400. His father had hoped to live as a noble among humans by founding a house, yet he ultimately never truly belonged. Hans questions how Crosser's existence remained secret given the rare succession, wondering if the imperial and ducal families deliberately ignored him. Crosser responds that the ducal houses likely know something and have chosen to conceal it as well. After all, revealing the marquis, true strength could upset the balance of power. Hans finally realizes that Crosser sought him out not for conflict, but out of loneliness. Their discussion continues uninterrupted until Asa and Leisha suddenly burst into the chamber. They quickly position themselves between Hans and Crosser, assuming hostile intent. Hans urges them to stand down, insisting he does not believe Crosser means him harm. Leisha protests, saying he has been monitoring Crosser's movements for quite some time. Without warning, Crosser addresses Leisha by his true name, stunning everyone present. They demand to know how he uncovered Leisha's hidden identity. Crosser explains that the dragon granted him the Eye of Truth. This ability allows him to see through any deception, no matter how cleverly concealed. Hans then clarifies Crosser's identity for Asa and Leisha. Leisha realizes that Crosser is the very individual Hans had been searching for, and Hans suggests showing him proper respect. Crosser dismisses the idea and insists they simply use his name, leaving Hans visibly surprised. He says he feels far more at ease without formalities. Hans attempts to remind him that social ranks exist for a reason. Crosser brushes this aside, claiming titles are merely human conventions. As a guardian sworn to serve dragons, he boldly declares his intention to serve Hans as well. The announcement leaves everyone speechless. Without hesitation, Hans firmly declines the offer, believes he already carries enough responsibility for his family, and refuses to take on another burden.